To all of our viewers in Israel, the United States, and around the world, welcome to this crucial gathering convened by the Jerusalem Post, where we unite in the face of the recent tragedy that has not only shaken the south of Israel, but has sent shockwaves across the globe. I'm Avi Meir, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post.
And I'm Ayan Hoffman, Deputy CEO of Strategy and Innovation. The despicable massacre by Hamas terrorists has ignited a conflict that demands our immediate attention, particularly in light of the alarming surge in anti-Semitic incidents that has followed.
In response to these challenges, the Jerusalem Post decided to spearhead a broadcast dedicated to combating anti-Semitism and ensuring the security of Jewish communities worldwide. However, our commitment goes beyond the immediate crisis. We recognize the profound impact of the conflict on individuals and communities, prompting us to extend our focus to the broader landscape of war initiatives and the critical task of post-war healing and rebuilding.
Our primary goal over the next few hours is to provide a dedicated platform for addressing both anti-Semitism and the multifaceted challenges faced by those affected by the conflict. This conference will not only shine a spotlight on initiatives combating anti-Semitism, but will also delve into efforts dedicated to the mental, emotional, and financial well-being of communities, including children and families, who will continue to grapple with the enduring repercussions long after the war concludes. Thank you for joining us in this important endeavor. Your watching this broadcast is a testament to our shared commitment to combating anti-Semitism and fostering a future where all communities can thrive in peace.
I would like to introduce our first speaker, the President of the State of Israel, Isaac Herzog.
Shalom to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, friends from all over the world who are tuning in for this timely discussion in an hour of great urgency for the Jewish people. I want to thank the Jerusalem Post for this outstanding initiative. Friends, the massacres of October 7th have brought memories of some of the darkest moments of history right into our present. The scope and horror of the atrocities are painfully familiar to our people, but the speed at which denial began to spread and Jewish suffering was dismissed exposed another painful truth. Anti-Semitism does not belong to some other time and place. It is right here. The fact is that in the wake of the massacre, many found ways to rationalize, contextualize, or even excuse themselves. This has always been the way about anti-Semitism. The reasoning may shift, but the bottom line is the same. The blame is always on the Jews. But as we know, corrupt ideologies often begin with the Jews, but rarely end with the Jews. That is why anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish issue or a Jewish problem. It is a human problem, a problem for entire humanity. And this curse, the age-old curse, is hitting humanity again. I commend, in the strongest terms, our dear friend President Joe Biden for laying out a clear national strategy to combat anti-Semitism well before the start of the war, actually the first one of its kind. Its relevance has become clearer and clearer than we ever would have hoped. I thank Special Anti-Semitism Envoy Professor Deborah Lipstadt for the clear voice of advocacy and reason she's offered in these troubled times. I thank world leaders from across the globe who are doing everything in their power to fight the familiar poison of anti-Semitism on their soil. And I commend every person of goodwill that has shown up to state loudly and clearly that the State of Israel and the Jewish people are one and are not alone. In Washington, in Paris, in London, we raise our voices and say never again, the never again that is right now. And that this never again should resonate all throughout the world. In Canada, in South Africa, in Ireland, in all sorts of places, also in Europe, and definitely in the United States and other places that people sometimes tend to forget. I salute the Jerusalem Post Group, our friend, CEO Inbar Ashkenazi and Editor-in-Chief Avi Meir, for this incredible event. The Jerusalem Post has been a critical source of reliable information and connection for millions and millions of viewers worldwide in this time of war. It remains, quite simply, the website and the paper of the Jewish people. I'm grateful to them. And I'm grateful to each of you for showing up to add your voices to this critical dialogue and conversation so that we can all come out of it stronger and stronger. Thank you very much. Toda Rabba from Jerusalem.
The Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism is the ministry entrusted by the Israeli government with monitoring and dealing with the phenomenon of anti-Semitism. Minister Amichai Shikli has identified the fight against anti-Semitism to be of utmost importance. He is going to talk about those efforts with Deputy Editor-in-Chief and Jewish World Correspondent Zvika Klein.
Shalom, Minister Amichai Shikli.
Shalom, Zvika.
How are you during these crazy times?
We are working hard. The main mission is to do whatever we can to win the war. And we all understand that the war is far larger than Hamas versus the IDF or the State of Israel. And I'm not just saying that it's also Hezbollah or the Houthis, but it's also a war against the Jewish people. And we can actually see it by the numbers, with a spike of 500% in anti-Semite incidents all across the globe.
It's hard to follow because every single day, you guys actually send out a report every single day covering all these research.
We are monitoring.
I can't even, and I'm
monitoring it daily.
I'm an anti-Semitism guy, and I can't even follow it. It's just there's thousands of % in certain cases.
I think it won't be an exaggeration to say that it is the worst since the 30s. The worst since the 30s.
Right.
Right.
So, I mean, first of all, how do you see, what's the core of this anti-Semitism? Because, many people in the Israeli left or in the American left feel betrayed, right? And in the American Jewish community, is a majority of them vote for the Democratic Party. So obviously, there's real concerns regarding this issue.
So we can see a few things. First, the atrocities of October 7 inspired some of the radical Muslims. You can see it clearly in Britain with huge demonstrations, and they say, oh, it's not pro-Hamas, it's just pro-ceasefire. But when you are listening to the voices and the violence that follows these demonstrations, not just in Britain, but also in the US, it is pro-Hamas demonstrations, very violent. The message is very clear, and you can see that these incidents and these demonstrations, they're not because of the response of the IDF. And you can actually see that most of the worst anti-Semite incidents happened before there was a ground operation in Gaza. So the idea that, hey, we can harm the State of Israel and we can harm the Jews, and let's go and let's go for the Jews. This is one thing that you can really see very, very clear. And then the second thing you can see is what we call the red and green alliance, the radical left with a radical Islamist, red and green, and this is something that disturbs us the most, because here it's not a mob. It's coming from the top universities that remain silent after October 7. Yeah, we condemn the loss of life on both sides, as if there are both sides in this event.
Right. So basically, you're saying the socialist or the extreme left and the extreme Islam are working together, or they're just like supplementing each other?
They're actually working together in the demonstrations, in the campuses, and I think that this is a very disturbing phenomenon. You can see that the old philosophy of intersectionality took with Black Lives Matters and other issues, also the Palestinian issues. So automatically they would see the Jews as colonialist, oppressors. They are against the Palestinians, and therefore it's just the same like the white and the blacks and the colonial.
Whether or not there are LGBT rights, etc., in the Palestinian Authority or in Gaza.
And you can see these weird signs of queers for Palestine, which is very, very ridiculous. But this is part of a philosophy. And I think this is a tragedy, because these Ivy League universities, they all carry the names of Veritas, yes, the motto of Harvard, or Aurim ve'atumim, of the University of Yale,
Right.
or Be'orcha nir'eo, which is the
Seeing
motto,
lights,
the motto of Columbia from the Book of Tehillim. And all these universities were established 200, 300 years ago with a very high reputation, saying we are here to follow the truth.
Right.
Basically.
So I wanna see. So what are you doing to counter this type of
But
anti-Semitism?
just to finish, but the
Yeah.
first, they say we're gonna go for the truth, Ken. We are seeking for the truth and for the light, etc. But you can see that the philosophy that dominates the Ivy League universities, that there is no truth, and because there is no truth, there is no good and bad. You cannot do the distinguish between wrong, evil, and good. You just cannot do it, and that is the main problem of the woke, the progressive, and the relativist approach that is dominating U.S.
And
campuses.
there's also the issue of Qatari funds for these universities.
Yeah, so one of the most fascinating data that we can see is that a student in one of those Ivy League universities, if he's learning in the STEM profession, he would be pro-Israeli on this case, most likely. And if he's learning in political science or Middle Eastern studies, he will be absolutely pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian. And why is it? Because after 9/11, Qatar and other countries spend
Billions of dollars.
billions of dollars. And there is a fascinating research of ISGAP on this particular issue. And they basically bought these faculties and created a significant impact, which possess a threat, I think, to the very core values of the U.S. and also for the Jewish community.
Right. But now we're actually Qatar is the negotiator with Egypt on the hostages. So isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's a major mistake.
Okay.
I wrote it. I'm against. I don't see Qatar as a mediator. I don't trust Qatar. It's like to go to Pakistan that hosted Bin Laden as to moderate
for the U.S.
Yeah, for the U.S. It is absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
And so you have Ania and you have Mashal and you have Musa Abu Marzouk. They are all in the fancy hotels in Qatar. We saw them on the in Qatar, by the way.
Right.
If we're talking about anti-Semitism, it is the worst Mondial I've seen. In
Worst
terms of
World Cup.
World Cup. Yeah, you would go there with an Israeli flag or with Magen David, and you're in a big trouble.
Right. So we don't have enough time. I want to speak about what your ministry is doing to combat this type of anti-Semitism.
Okay. So first and foremost, what we do is there is a war room with security organizations, and we also in relationship with the other organizations that operates from the Jewish communities abroad to monitor anti-Semitism on various platforms. It can be Telegram, every social network that you can think about, and not just a social network, and follow and to see where the threats coming from and what is the warmth of the anti-Semitism in specific places.
And physical, is there also physical security?
Yeah. So first of all, the war room is super important to understand what's going on and to pre-see if there is an intention to harm a specific community. Second is we allocated 10.5 million shekels for security components, physical components. It can be cameras or doors that are, fortified door prevented a terror attack in Germany
right.
Recently. So these are the kind of things we do on anti-Semitism. We also in contact with foreign governments about organizations that spread anti-Semitism, such as Samidun, such as pro-Hamas organization, and we have a good collaboration. And in some of the states, such as Germany, there are serious sanctions against Hamas, and
as well as also the fundraising. I know from many of these countries have been the platforms will not allow. Will not allow.
In Italy, for instance, they really closed some bank accounts that they could not raise money for these organizations.
PayPal, etc. Right. Okay. And now, related is the issue of Hasbara. It's not officially your in your portfolio of your ministry,
true.
yet you kind of
Yeah, we saw that
assume
there is
the
there is
responsibility.
no one there, so we are invested heavily in this issue. We have currently a delegation to Australia. They've met with
families
of hostages.
Right.
They met with the defense minister, the foreign affairs ministers of Australia. This is number 7. Before we were in Rome, in London, in Brussels, in the US, in Canada, they met Trudeau, they met Meloni. This is very, very
And
serious.
also creating, if I understand correctly, creating videos, right?
Yeah,
And-
this
and
is one.
content.
Delegation is one. This is a main effort because each delegation it's on the top of the news in this specific country. Second, we are in the war room of the Ma'arach HaHasbara Leumi, together with Moshe Kaviv, and we provide
With the Prime Minister's
most
office.
of the video content that you see on social platforms.
Okay.
Coming from the state of Israel, and we also allocated 20 million shekels for civil initiatives on the field of Hasbara.
That's amazing.
So you have two
And
tracks.
there's a lot
There
of
is a
really
matching track.
amazing civil
Yeah, so it
Hasbara.
can be commercial companies that want to go on a campaign. It can be high-tech companies that develop some tools for Hasbara, or NGOs. And if it's the big ones, they come with matching. And if they are small ones, they have a smaller amount that they can get without matching.
Okay,
Based
so
on
our time is up, but I just
Yeah.
want you to maybe even look at the camera and speak to diaspora Jews. What's your message to them at this time?
it is a time to fight, to stand up proudly as Jews, and not to stand and not to tolerate this hate. I think that the most important thing now is to demand moral clarity. If you cannot condemn the atrocities of October 7, if you cannot condemn Hamas, there is no dialogue. There is no dialogue. And we need to be assertive, and we need to fight this war. This is a war. This is a war. It's a war on campus. It is a war on the street of Gaza. Yes, every war is different in the tools that we need to use, but I think I am very, very proud that to be the enemy of Hamas, because when you are the enemy of Hamas, you don't just protect Am Israel, you protect the most basic human values.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Minister Shikli, and let's hope to meet next time in better times.
Bezrat Hashem and Am Israel Chai.
Amen.
Our next panel is called Faithful Allies, Christian Support for Israel and Spiritual Resilience, and features 2 leaders, one Christian, one Jewish, who are working on building bridges between people of faith for the betterment of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Tully Weiss, the founder of Israel 365, and Joel Rosenberg, the founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News. They'll be interviewed by Deputy CEO and Senior Correspondent Mayan Hoffman.
So it's really great to see both of you here today, and I think it's a very fascinating panel in that we have a panel where 2 people are very similar and yet very different. Rabbi Tully Weiss, you are a rabbi, you're Jewish, and you, of course, are a teacher of prophecy, you're Christian, but you're both journalists. And you're both journalists, you, the editor-in-chief at All Israel News, and you, the founder of Israel 365, which runs Israel 365 News. And both of you do something very unique as outlets, and that is that you write about Israel with a biblical perspective. So I want to start with you, Joel, because you actually wrote something very interesting in one of your recent columns. You said that there are 4 things that evangelicals need to be praying for right now: the total defeat and destruction of Hamas's terror empire, the liberation of the Gaza Strip from Hamas, the protection of the 1,000 Christians in Gaza, and the safety and salvation of innocent Palestinians and Israelis. But then you wrote this, that the Israeli government is not turning to God, and that even the chief rabbis are not actively and consistently calling on the God of Israel. And I quote, "So we as evangelicals must do it ourselves." A lot there. Unpack the way you see the situation and the role of the evangelicals in Israel today.
Well, I want to be clear, both in that column and the other coverage we've done at All Israel News, we're not saying that nobody in the Jewish world is asking people to pray. Obviously, Rabbi Tully and Rabbi Yehuda Glick and many others. But it is a little baffling, and I maybe you guys have a better perspective. But we were 40 days into the war, and the chief rabbis had not called for a national day of prayer and fasting, as you might think from 2 Chronicles 7:14, right, or the Book of Joel, one of my favorite books of the Bible. And or from any, I mean, you think of King Jehoshaphat calling for prayer and worship, saying, the king of Israel saying, I don't know what to do, I'm scared, God, would you help us? So it's a different political culture, it's a different religious culture than the United States, where I grew up, Jewish on my father's side, not Jewish on my mom's side. But I think it's a concern of mine, but I don't mean that Christians should do it instead of Jews. I just mean we need to, we're passionate about prayer. We need to intercede on behalf of a friend in need. But it is, I think, something that the country is going to have to process, why it's not a wholesale, everybody, this is the day or this is the month or whatever. We need to plead for God's help, not because we don't trust the IDF, because the IDF alone, according to the Bible, the Jewish scriptures, isn't enough, right? And so for most evangelicals, that's curious, but we don't want, it's not a criticism, it's a concern.
And it's the evangelicals standing up for Israel. So
it's part of a wholesale approach of stand with Israel no matter what, including prayer.
Including prayer. Tuli, do you agree?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't agree with the undertones that Israel is not turning towards God. You're seeing an unprecedented religious revival in Israel right now. You have all of these amazing stories and even videos about IDF soldiers who are not religious, who are asking for and wearing tzitzit. You have restaurants in Tel Aviv who are, for the first time, making their kitchens kosher. So you have this unprecedented turn towards God, which is very significant and important part of the whole war story. On the other hand, I do agree that it would be nice if the government took a more active role in the religious revival. But you got to remember that we have a secular government, and the people are more religious and more spiritual. And I think that when the dust settles, there will be a government that does look more religious and embraces God of Israel and is more faithful to the word in the Bible.
I mean, in the last century, the conference today, and I wanted to start with that question, but the reality is that the conference today is really focused on the battle, the fight against anti-Semitism. In the last century, Christian anti-Semitism boiled over and led to the murder of 6 million of our people. Yet, miraculously today, there are tens of millions of American Christians who stand united with Israel. Joel, what's changed? Why?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces of that. Well, there's many, but for the purpose of this discussion, I think it's two pieces. First, I wouldn't say it was Christian anti-Semitism in the first half of the 20th century. Adolf Hitler hated Christians, forced the Christians in Germany to take out the Bible and put in Mein Kampf instead, right? The swastika is a broken cross, and he basically forced priests and pastors to go with the state Nazi religion. And those who didn't, people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had to go underground, people who were really sticking to the Bible. That being said, my own family on my father's side, Orthodox Jews in Russia, had to escape the Tsar. The Tsar was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. But so it would be hard to make the case to Jewish people writ large, right, that Christians weren't involved. But here's the difference. The difference is people who actually read the New Testament cannot possibly, and believe it, can't possibly come to an anti-Semitic conclusion. It literally starts in Matthew chapter 1 with a genealogy, right, that goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and of course before that to Adam. So Jesus was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. They were devout Israelis. They practiced. They followed the Torah. If you actually believe the New Testament, you cannot be an anti-Semite. But those who were proclaiming themselves as religious figures for much of the first half of the century, in very high political positions, they were Christians in name only, and that's the biggest problem. If you get post-Holocaust, what you find is a massive return. I'm not going to listen to my leaders so much as I'm going to read the Bible for myself.
And
once that happens, you have a fundamental transformational shift to people going, oh my gosh, Jesus was Jewish. He lived, even Israelis today think that Jesus was a Roman Catholic, right? It must be Italian. He doesn't have any connection to us. That's changing. But I'm saying even Christians, if you're only taught by a priest and you're not reading the Bible for yourself, and he's an anti-Semite, what are your options? How would you know unless you read the text for yourself. And that's been a great change, thank God.
And we saw that, in the era, for example, of former U.S. President Donald Trump and the evangelical influence in the United States, that Christians really stood with Israel. Our own Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has spoken about Christians being some of our best friends. However, the statistics, the surveys, and the polls in recent years, very recent years, are starting to show that there is a shift. And Tuli, you questioned whether or not this relationship is actually going to survive. I'm just quoting you in something you wrote recently. You said, "We are at a crossroads in our relationship with Christian Zionists." With all of these studies showing the decline in the young evangelicals, there is a fear that things could change. So, Tuli, how do we stop these cracks in the foundation from growing into something that is unrepairable? And, if we don't find a way to reach these young people, these young Christian Zionists, will we start to see a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism again among the Christian population?
Yeah, so if I could answer the second question first. If we don't do anything, if the Jewish community doesn't make outreach to Christians an absolute priority, we're in big trouble, and America is in big trouble. You're seeing these anti-Semitic woke mobs that are just taking over the street in the United States. So if we don't do anything about that, we're in big trouble, and America is in big trouble. But on the other hand, the crisis that you're seeing and the fact that we're at this turning point, a crossroads. So we're now not only at a crossroads, we're in a crisis. And the war really demonstrates that we're in a crisis and emphasizes how important we must reach out to the Christians, our friends who are in the Christian world. And we've never had this opportunity. We don't really know what to make of it. I was in Columbus, and I was the rabbi of a synagogue. And in Columbus, I was one of 10 rabbis. And the entire Jewish community, I asked them, who here knows our Christian friends? And there wasn't a single person in the federation system that had a meaningful relationship with one of more than 1,000 pro-Israel churches in central Ohio. And we have a massive opportunity at an institutional level, right, to be creating task force with Jews and Christians. And every rabbi should be building strategically relationships with their pastors to carefully but quickly build these relationships between Jews and Christians.
So as we start to get closer, we start to talk about the hate of Muslims against Jews. Christians and Jews might be unified, but Muslims and Jews, as we can see going on in the world, certainly are not, at least today. But, there's somebody else that Muslims often hate, and that is Christians. In fact, Joel, you've played a key role in pressing for the release of Palestinian Christians from Gaza. There are about 1,000 left because it's very unsafe for them right there in Gaza right now. Yeah. Tell me what you know, what you can share about them getting out.
I'm happy to. And I just want to add, I really appreciate the rabbi's point, and I appreciate his friendship with the Christians, with me personally, because he's absolutely right. This is the moment. And for Jews and Christians to work together, I think it's primarily a sensitivity, understandable based on the earlier part of the conversation and the history of rabbis and other Jewish leaders thinking, I'm not sure I want to go there, but I think we do have to go there. And we've got to educate Christian young people about biblical history as well as Jewish history, even outside of the Bible. So that being said, as a Jewish evangelical, I also want to say, yes, I'm supposed to love my neighbor. And these Palestinian Christians are my neighbors. Yes, the Palestinian Muslims too, but there's a lot of international efforts being done. The Christians are being forgotten in many ways. And so what we began to write on All Israel News, on All Arab News, is sort of set off the warning bells. There's when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007, there were 3,000 to 5,000, people have different estimates, of Christians. There are not that many, but 2,000 to 4,000 have left, and there's only about 1,000 now. So what happened? They're terrified. They're all holed up in 3 different locations: 2 historic churches, a Catholic church and a Greek Orthodox church, and then a group of private homes. So the question is, how do they get out? Now, the IDF, understandably, is trying to tell every Palestinian, move south out of Gaza City, out of the north to the south where there's food and water and medical supplies and safety. The Christians aren't going. Why aren't they not going? Because they're terrified. They're not Muslims by definition, and they are fearful that what ISIS did in Syria and Iraq, rape and kill or torture every Christian they could find, they're really terrified that just going into the south without any safe haven could be genocidal. I don't think the IDF or the Israeli civilian leadership had thought about that immediately. They were like, this is our policy. We move people south, keep them safe. So that was the right policy. I support it. But I began to say, listen, I think the IDF and the Israeli civilian leadership needs a different approach with the Christians. We need to get them food, water, medical supplies, and doctors in those 3 locations. But also we need to think, how do we get them to safety? My encouragement is to move them to the West Bank. There's all kinds of political challenges with that, but at least that's their culture, that's their language. There are Palestinian Christians that can welcome them and want to.
Interesting. Now, we're going to run out of time here, so I want to be able to ask one more question of each of you that I think is important for us to leave on this sentiment. So, first of all, for Joel, I want to know, what do Christians need from the Jewish community in order to continue standing with Israel? But before you answer, and everybody has about 2 minutes to answer, okay, I want you to answer after that, please, Rabbi Weiss. What do Jews need today from the Christian community as we deal with the crisis that's unfolding in Israel? You start, you finish. Please, everybody, 2 minutes, okay, at maximum.
All right, so it's like the presidential debates. But I think we're pretty much aligned on this. I think we've got to work together. We've got to lean in. Pastors, evangelical pastors in the United States, Canada, around the world, need to reach out to rabbis and Jewish leaders and say, can we sit, can we talk? Yes, there's going to be the fundamental disagreement between who Jesus is the Messiah, not the Messiah. That's not unimportant. And rather than saying, it really doesn't matter, it does matter. But let's say we don't agree on this. We understand that we don't agree on this, but what can we do to stand together in this moment of crisis? And that's where bring a rabbi to a church and say, share, what is your community's heart? How are you grieving? Let's weep with those who weep. But let's also learn the biblical history as well as the more modern Jewish history, which is horrible. And I think there's a heart of compassion within evangelical Christianity that may not entirely be true in Roman Catholicism or Greek Orthodoxy. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's primarily there in evangelicalism. Why? Because taking the Bible as your central and highest authority and reading it for yourself is the central part of evangelicalism. And you can't miss the Jewishness of Jesus and God's heart and love for Israel and his people.
Thank you. Julie.
I think that what the Christians need to do is listen to what the anti-Semites are saying. Because for the very first time, the anti-Semites are not only attacking the Jews, they're also attacking the Christians. And they are calling for a jihad against Jews and Christians. And they are saying first the Shabbat people, but then the Sunday people. And the attacks that they're planning against Israel is the little Satan, but they are plotting and planning attacks also against the big Satan. And Christians are seeing this as a Jewish problem, as an Israel problem, and our soldiers are fighting because they understand that we're not only defending ourselves and our own families, we're defending civilization. And that's the part that I think that Christians need to understand. The silver lining is that as evil as the Hamas enemy is, and they are evil, they have woken up the faith community to stand together in unprecedented ways. And we know that God is bringing together Jews and Christians to together defend the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and the God of Israel.
Amen. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panel is called Combating Anti-Semitism, a Call to Action in Campuses, Parliaments, and Society, and features 3 speakers, Nimrod Palmach, the CEO of Israel Is, Jonathan Davis, the Vice President of External Relations and head of the Raphael Recanati International School, and Dan Diker, President of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. They will be interviewed by Steve Lindy, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Report.
Thank you for joining us. And Dan Diker, we'll start with you. Tell us about your work on SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine.
Well, Steve, back in 2018, when I wrote this book, Students for Justice in Palestine, Unmasked, Jihad on Campus, little did I know that it would become one of the most sought-after books in 2023, post-October 7th massacre. And the reason is that the Students for Justice in Palestine, a Hamas-affiliated group on more than 200 North American campuses, paved the way to the October 7th massacre.
In what way?
In the sense that it was established by a Hamas refugee, if you will, by the name of Professor Hatem Bazian, a former professor at Berkeley, now the president of Zaytuna, an Islamic university housed at Berkeley. And he was the one that chaired and founded Students for Justice in Palestine as early as 1992, and it went national in 2010. This organization, if I could sum it up in one sentence, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, a clarion call for genocide against the Jews. And believe me, the Hamas leadership in Gaza is very encouraged and energized by the fact that they know that they have the unqualified support of thousands of university students across these 200 campuses that essentially legitimize the October 7, 2023 Hamas mass murder of Jews.
Well, that was quite a dramatic opening. Jonathan Davis, what do you see as the impact of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on Israeli academia?
Well, one of the impacts that I can see is the fact that some of these extreme organizations would like to see Israeli academia boycotted. And we need to do something about that, because Qatar has fueled these universities with $2.5 billion in funds. And I think that Jewish philanthropists need to band together. And this time they crossed the line, okay? And it's not the same as it was before October 7th. And I think donors need to gather together and discuss what they want to do with their funds and discuss exactly what the limits are of professors with academic chairs with regards to anti-Semitism and to pro-genocidal remarks. The other thing that I would mention is the fact that youngsters in the United States should know that they've got a place to study in Israel, that we're here for them, and anytime they want to come here and study here, I can guarantee them that we're not going to tear down any posters. They can walk around with their mezuzah on their neck or Magen David, and they're going to feel very little anti-Semitism here, and we will embrace them. And the third thing that I would like to mention is the fact that, in my personal opinion, we need to really beef up the social media war. We're good in high tech here. We're good in social media. We need to be there for every single university group in the States who needs to fight for their Jewish identity on social media.
Well, Jonathan, you brought up the issue of youngsters in America, and I'd like to ask you, Nimrod Palmach, how do you see this wave of anti-Semitism manifesting itself among the younger generation in North America?
Well, listen, we know it's a problem that exists for a few decades already. We also know that since 2014, Protective Edge Operation, when we spent 51 days in Gaza trying to destroy Hamas terrorist tunnels that were aimed to do what they just did to us in October 7th, that brought a tipping point of anti-Semitism waves in those campuses against Israel. Unfortunately, while us, just simple good people in Israel, when we spend time in the front in Gaza defending Israel from actual harms, we lost a whole new front that we were not all the way realized it exists, and it's the fight on social media. We have a lot of work to do of collecting people and to share stories. That's what we do, by the way, in Israelis. Our approach is to harness potential of young Israelis when they usually go abroad to travel, to connect with peers, either in America or in different places around the world.
Thank you. Dan, back to you. You've also done a lot of work on BDS. What do you think is the best way to counter these anti-Israel and anti-Semitic initiatives such as BDS and SJP?
Steve, BDS, back in the day when it first became a part of the Israeli and Jewish consciousness, in specifically North America and in Western Europe, was misunderstood. They thought it was a peaceful grassroots expression of political criticism. It is nothing of the sort. The BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, is a terror-affiliated movement. You should know the Palestinian National Islamic Forces in Ramallah includes Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, the Palestinian Liberation Front, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the same Palestinian genocidal groups that cooperated, as the BBC just revealed, in the massacre on October 7th. The best way to fight it is, A, to expose it for what it really is. We are facing a global jihad. Hamas has told us this since it was founded in 1988, and Yasser Arafat has used, beginning with 1964 and the original founding of the PLO, and then when he took the chairmanship in 68, he reminded us, using Russian Soviet language, that the BDS movement would come. The use of religious terminology, of jihadist terminology, that very much characterizes the underpinnings of the BDS movement is exactly what we're facing today, and it is an existential threat to the Jewish people in the state of Israel, and one that ought to be, as Jonathan Davis said very eloquently, it must be combated on social networks first and foremost.
On that note, Jonathan Davis, do you see the challenges of anti-Semitism presenting new ideas for us?
Well, I think that these challenges present opportunities. For example, I think it's time that anyone who wishes to side with Hamas or with these jihadists, which Dan Diker discussed just now, I think they need to be shamed. And I think that if some of the greatest employers in the United States in major companies happen to be Jewish owned, I think it's time that the CVs and the resumes of the jihadists and of the people in favor of genocidal ideology, such as Hamas on these campuses, I think it's a good idea to shame them. I've watched, by the way, how Jews of New York has done something really terrific, this site, where they photograph people who are tearing down posters. And afterwards, they put their profile up on the internet and they shame them. So number one, what these people did to us is really bad. And I think if we don't use the opportunity now to, first of all, unite as Jews, that's Reformed, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Modern Orthodox, Haredi, whatever it is, unite. Number two, agree on a whole bunch of issues. If we don't do this, then these 1,400 innocent people who were massacred here were massacred for nothing. And now, in my personal opinion, we need to take our gloves off. It's no longer a great time to be politically correct. And I think it's time for us to basically present the case that Jewish lives matter.
Well, that was a strong statement. We'll go back to you, Nimrod Palmach, in America. What do you think was the tipping point that triggered the current escalation in anti-Semitism among American youth?
Like I said, it's really easy for American youth and all over the world to connect these days via social media. It's very easy also to connect to the narrative that the Palestinians are presenting in a very smart ways, where Israel is the well-weaponed, big place, in front of the Palestinians that are poor and have no abilities. It's really easy to connect. And like I said, we are in Israel is establish an academy for influencers, realizing that there is a huge front that we are simply not there. Now try to imagine Gaza launching an attack against Israel, or maybe we can imagine it right now, and you don't have an army to protect. How helpless you can be and what's the outcomes. And that's what have happened at the last decade in social media. We were not really there to defend ourselves. Now our starting point is very low. In terms of numbers, how many Jews are there in the world? How many supporters of the Palestinian idea in Islam around the world? And so if you ask me, I think the tipping point, again, I'm coming back to Protective Edge operation, where we had to eliminate the terror attack tunnels. And it took us time. Usually when we go to fronts in Gaza, it's few days. The world's open a clock for us, and it's continuing for 3, 4, 5 days. And I don't know how well you remember this summer. I'm asking my peers here, but we were spending 51 days, me also as a reservist, again, not knowing there is a whole new front that we left in the back. And this front was the social media. So it's not just started now. What we are seeing now in TikTok and Instagram, the movement, of being against Israel for young people, or taking the side of Palestinians, and by thus taking the side of Hamas, is actually started way back. And unfortunately, we are also still way back. What we're trying to do again, and I think this is something important to hear, is to give tools to as many Israelis and Jews around the world that we know to better tell them story in the most authentic ways, because this is what works. A young Jewish girl shows her, I don't know, love for fashion in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and it works. And people from Australia and Canada and Ohio reflect to her, and by thus connect to her.
Thank you. Dan, you wanted to say
Steve, what
something.
Nimrod is saying is that the poisonous root of what we are witnessing today on social media began in the late 1960s, when Israel was fashioned as an imperialist, colonialist power, joined at the hip with the United States that had been suffering through its Vietnam experience. Israel failed to pay attention to the growth of that root, and it has now, unfortunately, blossomed into this massive, cancerous tumor that is claiming the minds of young Jews. And Israel is the answer to that problem. And as Jonathan Davis has said so eloquently at Reichman University, at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, we are all leading this charge to change the perception of our enemies and also to change the truth and the understanding of what Israel really is. We have got decades of work to catch up on. We can win that war, but the war for our international legitimacy is no less important than the use of F-35s against the Iranian regime and its massacre that it mobilized using the Hamas as its puppet.
Jonathan Davis, how do you respond to that? What can Israel do?
Well, first of all, we need to take into consideration that the anti-Semites on campus are divided into different groups. Okay, you have the fundamentalist Islamist types who are not going to change. And then you have maybe some white supremacists who were born with anti-Semitism. You're not going to change them. But the largest group are a bunch of useful idiots, actually, who don't even know sometimes where Gaza is or where Beersheba is, or gays for Palestine who don't realize that if they wish to be gay in Ramallah, okay, they're either going to be hung or stoned to death, and know nothing about women's rights and all of those different things. So I think we need to go out there and we need to do a job on at least presenting the facts as they are. I totally agree with Dan, who, by the way, completed his master's degree in counterterrorism at Reichman University, which is probably one of the reasons that he's a greater expert on counterterrorism than I am. Okay, but basically, I have to tell you that we need to go for the useful idiots and concentrate on that and go in there, in my opinion, in a kind of a way which presents the truth and the facts. I don't think we have anything to lose here. People used to accuse us of pinkwashing, okay, when we tried to present the fact that we have a gay parade in Tel Aviv. We don't need to be careful about pinkwashing, okay? We need to present the facts as they are. If there's a gay parade in Tel Aviv, okay, if the speaker of our ministry of the Knesset happens to be a gay person, it's fine to flaunt that. Okay. And if the present person in the and people in the foreign ministry who are gay and everything to do with pluralism, okay, I'm sick and tired of hearing, okay, from a bunch of radicals in the States, some of them Jewish, okay, that we shouldn't be allowed, okay, to mention these things. Now is the time to mention these things because the useful idiots don't know these facts.
Okay. And Nimrod Palmach will give you the last word. What do you think about all this?
I just want to address what my friend just said here. And first of all, I definitely agree. I mean, on a perfect world, the best thing to do is to come and show facts to people all over. And, you know, facts are facts. But we failed in showing facts. And more than that, I want to tell to Professor Jonathan, it doesn't work with the younger generation that couldn't care less about facts. I'm seeing here, we are walking among them in the campuses in the USA and other places. Something else is appealing to them. And I think the facts needs to be in the second stage. Number one is to create a connection. And I know that this is not the language that we are understanding. To connect, to understand, and eventually the best way to reach out to these Gen Zs and Gen Ys in campuses is via storytelling. Is the point where a regular Israeli from anywhere in Israel showing his life in Israel via social media And then people, like you said, you call them useful idiots. So, wow, there is parties in Israel. There is fashion in Israel. There is food parties in Israel. And we are seeing that this methodology now, it maybe looks soft. It's not. It's actually hitting a fist, an iron fist with a glove of cloth. Okay, and this is the way we try to approach things: is to bring the facts on the second stages, and first to make connection. That's the only way it works on social media. You can have, in a matter of 6 months, 100,000 followers just because you are showing your food. And only then you're starting to show what's the true face of Israel. And like you said, this is for the people that are simply ignorant of knowing Israel, have never been here, have never been to understand the democratic, liberal, beautiful culture of Israel.
Okay, that seems like a good place to end it. Thank you so much for joining us for this fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much.
Anti-Semitism at the United Nations is ubiquitous. But Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gillad Eran, has worked tirelessly to fight for the rights and voice of Israel and the Jewish people. Let's hear from him.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank the Jerusalem Post for hosting this important and timely event. The October 7th massacre is a day that every Israeli and Jew around the world will remember forever. The deliberate horrors that occurred in southern Israel at the hand of Hamas terrorists harken back to the days of the Einsatzgruppen rampaging throughout Europe. Now, barely 2 months after these atrocities, the Jewish people are facing a wave of hatred not seen in almost 80 years. And nowhere is this wave of Jew hatred clearer than at the United Nations. The UN was founded on the ashes of the Holocaust to prevent atrocities. It is looked at as the bastion of civilization, a moral compass which all nations should follow. Sadly, dear friends, the UN has failed spectacularly to carry out its mandate. The lack of condemnation by UN bodies and officials in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre underscored the systemic bias against Israel throughout the organization. Meanwhile, the UN's moral compass is far gone. The very fact that the leader of this organization, the Secretary General himself, expressed an understanding for Hamas terror proves the illegitimacy of the UN. Terror is terror is terror. There is never a justification for murdering innocent civilians in their homes or abducting them. There just isn't. When the heads of UN Women and UNICEF cannot bring themselves to utter even the faintest condemnation of Hamas crimes against Israeli women and children, we must understand that if these UN bodies are not explicitly condemning Hamas's crimes, they are implicitly approving them. When the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly cannot call Hamas's barbaric attack terrorism, while they express outrage over the humanitarian situation only in Gaza, Hamas and other terror groups see a green light to continue their savage actions. In the internet age, everything happens in an instant. The lies that UN bodies and officials spread about Israel make their way around the world before the truth can even get its shoes on. And these lies encourage anti-Semitism across the globe. Friends, we must fight back. We cannot allow the UN to control the narrative. And that is why I go on the offensive at the United Nations. When the heads of UN Women and UNICEF briefed the Security Council, I presented photos of Naama Levy and Shani Luke, their bodies desecrated by Hamas terrorists. When the head of the World Health Organization participated in a Security Council meeting, I presented indisputable evidence that Hamas uses hospitals in Gaza for terror. In the wake of the Secretary General's outrageous remark expressing an understanding for terror, I immediately called on him to resign. Yes, he must resign. I will never stop fighting for the truth in the United Nations. None of us should. We must work together to expose the rampant hypocrisy and double standards that exist in this body and that are influencing the next generation. It is clear that words are no longer enough. We must act. Professors who spew anti-Semitic bile should be fired. Students who call for the end of the State of Israel should be expelled. Violent protesters supporting Hamas terrorists should be prosecuted. We are still hurting for the lives lost on October 7th and its aftermath and these hostages who remain in Gaza. But Israel and Jews around the world are more united than ever. And friends, when we are united, we will prevail against all anti-Semites. When we are united, we will destroy Hamas. When we are united, we will bring all our hostages home. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Am Israel Chai.
Senior Knesset member Danon served as Israeli ambassador to the United Nations between 2015 and 2020. His recent book, In the Lion's Den, chronicles that time and presents a compelling vision of Israel's future as a major player on the global stage. MK Danon will be interviewed by Tamar Uriel Be'eri, managing editor of jpost.com.
Ambassador Dani Danon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to start with the question, do you believe that the way that the war is currently being managed is the correct way to go?
So the goal of the war are very simple, to bring the hostages back and to defeat, to eliminate Hamas. I think we're not doing enough. I think we hear a lot about eliminating Hamas, but when we look at where are we today, for me it's not enough. If you would have told me on the eve of October 7th that after 2 months we will be where we are today, we would tell you no way. We have to do more, we have to be more aggressive, and I expect that after we'll be able to bring as many hostages back and we renew the war effort, that we will use different methods. We will work in a way that will put real pressure on the leadership of Hamas and will get us to the goals of the war.
Who would you say isn't doing enough specifically?
So I sit on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, on important subcommittees, and I tell those people directly what I think about the operation. I don't want to name names, but I tell the leadership, they work very hard, they understand the responsibility, but when you look at the results, when you look at the map of Gaza today, and you see where the IDF troops are today after almost 2 months, for me it's not enough. I would have involved more troops. I would have attacked not only from the north, but also from the south. And I think the people of Israel, we support the leadership, but we expect them to be strong, to be aggressive, and to understand that this time the public in Israel will not accept a ceasefire, will not accept half of the job. We expect that we will see full elimination of Hamas.
Right. You're saying you would have attacked both north and the south. You put out an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago with Yesh Atid MK Ram Ben Barak regarding Western countries accepting refugees. The refugees have flooded south, but if the IDF operation continues in this current direction, then we will see the operation spreading now into the south. So what would be the solution for refugees then?
So first of all, when we speak about the operation itself, I think that we will allow them to move somewhere else. They have place in Gaza to move while we operate in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, in the border with Egypt. We have to deal with those areas. We cannot leave them intact. The op-ed you mentioned, I published with MK Ram Ben Barak, we spoke about the future, about the day after. And I believe that countries should accept Palestinians who wants to leave Gaza. We are not forcing anyone, especially the Arab countries. You know, I see the Arab League, they meet every once in a while, they speak about their brothers and sisters in Gaza. Why they don't accept refugees from Gaza in their own countries? They speak the same language, they have the same religion. By the way, you have more than 20 million foreign workers who come to work in Arab countries. So why don't they offer tens of thousands of Palestinians to come and work in their countries?
So they're looking for this additional work, but they're not accepting specifically Palestinians.
They're not granting any visas to Palestinians. And I think it's time to speak about the idea of allowing those, we are not forcing anyone, those who want to move, to have the option to start better life somewhere else.
And for those that, will stay and, eventually we'll see, Gaza trying to come back together. The Likud party has made it very clear that they do not believe that the Palestinian Authority should be the governing body responsible in Gaza once Israel is out of it. What then should be done? Who should be responsible for being inside Gaza after the fact?
So first, I want to explain why we are not happy with all those ideas of the PA coming into Gaza. Until now, I haven't heard any condemnation from the PA about the massacre of October 7th. On the contrary, Jibril Rajoub issued a few days ago a statement saying that he understands why it happened. Another issue, we allowed the PA to run Gaza in 2005. We handed the keys to the PA, and after a few months, they started a civil war with Hamas, and Hamas took over Gaza. So we want something that will be real, will be sustainable. And I think we are open to listen about different ideas. For us, the issue of security, we are not going to give it into the hands of anyone else. We're going to have to make sure that we have the ability to move in Gaza and to take care of the threats if there will be more threats there.
So it will be Israel who's responsible for Gaza after the war?
No. Israel will have the freedom to maneuver on security issues. Very similar to what's happening today in Judea and Samaria. If we identify a threat in Jenin or in Nablus or Ramallah, we send our special forces to neutralize the threat. The same will be in Gaza. So we will not be inside Gaza. We will not run the daily lives of the Gazans, but we will have the ability to maneuver in order to eliminate threats.
Now, listen, on the international front, Israel's not exactly doing well. Our reputation right now in the world is precarious, to say the least. As the former representative to the United Nations for Israel, what would you say is the solution here?
To win the war. I know in the Jerusalem Post you speak a lot about the international community and you are very involved and you have a great audience. But people ask me a lot about the hasbara, the PR of Israel. And I tell them, listen, we don't care now. We care about winning the war. Once we defeat Hamas, we will deal with the international community. We will deal with the image of Israel. But for us, now it's either us or them. So there is no place for maneuver. I think we should not worry about it. We have the support, the moral majority support us. Countries like the US, Germany, UK, they stand with us. You are right that we hear a lot of condemnation from the UN and from other countries, but today I really don't care about it.
So isn't that kind of abandoning, though, the Israeli communities abroad and the Jewish diaspora? Because these people are being directly affected by Israel's bad reputation, because those protesting, for example, against Israel and committing violent attacks on Jewish identities, they are doing it in direct correlation with the lack of support for Israel abroad.
On the contrary, I think Jews around the world will be safer once we defeat Hamas. But it will be a real victory. I think the Jewish communities will be empowered by this victory. I think the fact we haven't done it so far, it brought more pressure, more demonstrations, and I think for the long run, the stronger we will be after this war, the safer the Jews around the world will be able to continue with their lives. I condemn all those anti-Semitic attacks against Jews. We have seen brutal attacks in Canada, in France, in the US, in the UK. We should demand more from the authorities in those countries to take concrete actions, to arrest, to indict those people who act against Jews in such a shameful manner. But I think also the Jewish community, and I speak a lot with many leaders, and I participate in many events. I cannot go now, but I do it, on Zoom, and I tell them, give us the support to win the war, and after that, we'll be able to support you more.
And you mentioned Ambassador Guterres briefly. I'm curious how you see the UN as a body affecting overall the war in Israel.
So I had no expectation from the UN itself. They always vote against us. But Secretary Guterres, that's a disgrace. I was shocked. I was very disappointed because I know him personally. I hosted him over Shabbat dinner in my apartment in New York. He came with me to the southern border. He went to the tunnel. He met the communities. So he knows exactly with whom we are dealing. And what we have seen since October 7th, that he became the spokesperson of Hamas. That's something which we cannot accept. That the Secretary General of the UN will amplify the words of Hamas. He will justify the acts of those terror attacks against our communities. I think we should demand for Secretary Guterres to resign, or we will not work with him. And I'm calling my colleagues and our friends in the US not to work with Secretary Guterres if he continues to support Hamas, and he's not denouncing what's happening today in Gaza. He speaks a lot about the children of Gaza. What about our children, about the hostages that are in Gaza today?
And just one final question. What do you think, as somebody who's represented Israel abroad for many, many years, is key in order to bring together the Israeli people and the diaspora Jewry?
Well, I think today we are united. You know, we are under a lot of stress, both here in Israel and in the diaspora, but we believe that we will prevail. And the Jewish unity, today I see the amount of love, support, donation. People call me, what can we do to help? You know how many calls I got from people who want to volunteer? They tell me that we want to come and serve in the military. And I tell them, you are too old, we don't need you, you can think about something else. But I feel that today we stand together as a nation. That's why I'm optimistic, that today it's hard for us, we are paying a heavy price, we have a lot of issues, but I believe that at the end of the day, we will prevail.
Ambassador Danon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yael Eckstein is president and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which celebrated its 40th anniversary this year. The fellowship is the largest provider of humanitarian aid in Israel. Yael is a visionary leader and teacher. She'll be interviewed by Mayan Hoffman, deputy CEO and senior correspondent at the Jerusalem Post.
Yael, thank you so much for being here today. I want to jump right into our interview to talk about the subject at hand. Every day, there's a new report about an anti-Semitic incident. Since October 7th, we feel like the anti-Semitism is rising, and it's because of the massacre. Christians were the first to stand with Israel after this incredible tragedy, which is very different, I have to point out, than what it was like 80 years ago during the previous tragedy. Talk about that.
Well, Mayan, I think it's really important to point out that the October 7th massacre did not start the anti-Semitism. It was a massacre, and there's no other way to paint that. And I think that what it triggered in the world was the outward expression of anti-Semitism, which has always been there, that there are facts, and then there's the frame that you place over the facts when you interpret them. And people who have a bend towards hating the Jews will twist and color it according to that set of beliefs. And I think too many people have found ways to blame the beheading of children on the Jews and people being kidnapped on Jews and burnt bodies. Oh, it's somehow the Jews' fault. That's anti-Semitism, though. There's nothing rational about that. It's a prejudice. And you're not going to change the prejudice, and prejudices aren't arguments. Well, on the other hand, you have evangelical Christians who have stood with Israel before this massacre and continue to stand with Israel now. And it is relatively new. During the Holocaust, of course, you had the very well-known names like Oskar Schindler, who was a Christian, and Corrie ten Boom, who was a Christian. And I think the world remembers them and recognizes the sacrifices that they made during that time to save Jewish lives. And even in Yad Vashem here in Jerusalem, we have a whole forest that's for the righteous Gentiles. But like you pointed out, I think it's very different now than it was 80 years ago, because if we would plant a tree for every Christian who is standing with Israel right now, I think we would have a forest covering an entire continent. And I think that this is really what's new in our time. The anti-Semitism isn't new. We haven't even reached the numbers of Jews around the world that we had before the Holocaust. It's a very stark reminder to me that what we're experiencing of the world hating us, of anti-Semitism, of blaming all the world problems on the Jews, this isn't something new. This is the oldest narrative in the book. But what is new is that we have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Christian friends who are standing with Israel. And I think that's something that gives me a lot of hope that at least in little ways, things are getting better.
Now, Yael, you chose to take around 100 Christian leaders to Washington ahead of the March for Israel, and you asked them to sit in a room and to watch the extremely disturbing footage of the Hamas body cameras, the video that the IDF put together, in which we see really what happened on October 7th in real time. I saw it, and I can tell you that from my perspective, it was one of the worst days, one of the worst experiences even of my entire life. Why did you choose to show it to these Christians, and how did they respond?
Well, it was actually the idea of a Jewish family that lives here in Israel who realizes how new, how fragile, and how important the relationship is between Jews and Christians. And they were thinking of ways to invest in this relationship, to solidify that support, to make sure that as Christians stand with Israel, it's also from that faith perspective and background, but it's also that they realize the war that Israel is fighting, that in a way doesn't have anything to do with faith. There's good and there's bad. There's light and there's dark. And what Israel is fighting is evil. What Israel is fighting is darkness. And they started to realize that with all of the changing narratives and accusations and anti-Semitism around the world, for this very fragile and new relationship between Israel, the Jewish people, and evangelical Christians, God forbid do we see them turn. And so it was very important to this donor. They said, I'll sponsor everything, the airfare to fly the leaders in and the hotel for a night if they need. But they have to see the evil that Israel is fighting. So when they hear all of the accusations from the world, they'll remember that Israel is not fighting anything different than our war for survival. And we're fighting an ideology that is an ideology that's just as threatening and destructive and horrible, and it's bad for Israel the same way it's bad for Europe and America. And it's a threat to Israel the same way it's a threat to America and Europe. I was listening to General Kemp talk about how Israel is one of the most moral armies in the world, that when America was fighting the war, if they would kill 5 civilians for 1 terrorist, then that was kind of the best they could do, given the fact that terrorists use civilians as human shields, and that Israel is actually more 1-to-1. And so he was bringing up all these examples how Israel is the most moral army in the world. And you look on the ground now, and the world says, before you target Hamas, evacuate the citizens. So Israel evacuates the citizens. What's happening? We're accused of the next Nakba. That no matter what Israel does, there's always a response why we didn't do it right. And so for these Christian leaders who are on the forefront of creating a narrative for their people and educating and inspiring some of them tens of thousands of their church participants and their congregations, it was important both to the fellowship and to this Jewish donor that they would recognize the war Israel is fighting, that it's a just war, and that it's a war that we're fighting on behalf of Europe and America as well, trying to get rid of this ideology that celebrates death, that celebrates terrorism, so that all of us, hopefully, can live in peace.
So I want to jump to the work that the fellowship did immediately in the aftermath of the war. From what I understand, you were one of the first, if not the first, organization in the field to help the thousands of Jews who were both wounded in the field themselves and also who lost their homes and everything that in their lives. Tell me about the work that you did. Tell me about the work that you're doing.
Well, I think October 7th, everyone will remember where they were, what they were doing when they first heard about the attack. It's kind of like the 9/11 of our time. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and it's just, it's crazy for me to remember that she wasn't alive during 9/11, because it's something that I feel like shaped who I was when I heard about it and the response after. And I think that October 7th is the 9/11 for this generation. And for the fellowship, we're in a unique position that we weren't only surprised, shocked, distraught by what was happening, but we were in a position to act. We've been investing in security infrastructure in Israel, in the northern and southern border, since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. And so we are in daily contact, even in a regular basis, with the heads of security, the heads of welfare, all the local organizations that are operating there, with the Homefront Command. And so it was ready on October 7th that we were working both with the Homefront Command and the local municipalities of Be'er Sheva and Sderot and Shar HaNegev, both bringing food to people in their bomb shelter, preparing meals for after the 30 hours when the people from the kibbutzim were released from their bomb shelters. It was a fellowship who was there bringing them food and drink as they were getting the horrible news about the fate of their loved ones. And so essentially since that day, what we've learned is that the needs change quickly. And we've been able to shift and accommodate that through partnerships with the local municipalities, through partnerships with local organizations, and through our ability to identify a need and implement those programs independently if there's no other answer. For example, we've donated and distributed over 4,200 flak jackets, helmets, and security gear to the civilian first responders, many of which have bullet holes in them already and saved lives of the people wearing them.
So, yeah, I mean, in general, the fellowship is actually known for providing more support than any other nonprofit organization in the state of Israel. So tell me, you're talking to a vast audience right now. How can the world step up and help you to help us?
Well, I think it's an amazing question, Mayan, because what the fellowship represents is not only this effective aid distribution of identifying needs and immediately, without bureaucracy, going in to meet them. Within 3 weeks after the war, we distributed $15 million to all different areas of emergency needs, from food to bulletproof ambulances to first responders kits to bulletproof vests. But what we represent really, which I think is just as powerful in this modern era where we thought it would never happen, but anti-Semitism is plaguing the world again. What we represent is that voice of millions of Jews and Christians and even people who don't necessarily come to support Israel from the place of spiritual or faith, but that they realize that this is a just war and something that is important. We represent the voice of over 700,000 donors who give $25 a month, $75 a month. And so our aid, just as important it is in the practical, tangible aid that we provide, I think the message that we bring of you are not alone to the people of Israel. You have millions of Christians standing behind you, hundreds of thousands of Jews standing behind you in America, in Europe. That sometimes it could feel here in Israel, especially when you're under attack and you're being blamed. One of the hardest things is the feeling that you're alone, that the world has gone crazy and they just don't understand this just war that Israel is fighting. So I think just as important as the aid that we're distributing every single day on the ground is the message that we're telling the people of Israel as well. You're not alone. Never again will you be alone. And you have millions of Jews and Christians who stand with you.
Yael Eckstein, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mayan.
Michal Cutler-Wunsch was appointed to the post of Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism in mid-September. At the time, no one could have envisioned the October 7 terror attack or the Swords of Iron War, which has led to a striking increase in anti-Semitic incidents worldwide. Michal joins us for an interview via Zoom with Zvika Klein, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post.
Shalom, Michal Cutler-Wunsch.
Shalom, Zvika.
So you are the Special Envoy on combating anti-Semitism for the State of Israel. And your background is all related, I think, to what you're doing today, right?
Yeah. So, I say with sadness and with a tremendous sense of responsibility that I joined this coalition of special envoys for combating anti-Semitism. We should be aware that there are about 30 of us around the world, which is really a testament to the sad state of affairs, because that means 30 countries have seen the need to appoint this role because of the increase in anti-Semitism. And you're right. Although I was appointed just a few weeks before the war, I come to this after decades of, research and activism and legislative sort of experience in addressing the multiple fronts of this unconventional war for public opinion, whether it's the international law and human rights front or the university spaces in which we've seen the rise in anti-Semitism, and of course the online spaces in which we've seen a huge increase in anti-Semitism.
Right. Are we seeing something new, or are we just seeing it different? Many people are trying to understand, to me, as someone that's been covering it for a long time, many things don't surprise me. But you know what? Like, something that I've just realized, it's like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Many of us have been speaking out against it for such a long time. And only now did the mainstream Israeli, Jewish, or even Western society understand that this means to wipe out the Jewish state.
So I think you're 100% right, Speaker. I think that what 10/7 did, and I insist on calling it 10/7 because it's important to understand that just like 9/11, the world cannot continue as if nothing happened post 10/7. The world is not the same as it was the day before. And the very same anti-Semitism that enabled the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, the atrocities of 10/7 actually enable and fuel the responses to 10/7 that deny, that justify, that support, and that attack Jews in the wake of 10/7. And what you've just said actually hits the nail right on the head. For many of us that have been tracking the mutation of anti-Semitism to its current, we'll call it mainstream modern strain of anti-Zionism that negates the right of Israel to exist in any borders from the river to the sea, that has been a phrase that we understood as a call to annihilate the state of Israel, but all of a sudden ripping off that mask because it echoes the Hamas charter from the river to the sea, which was projected on the George Washington Library, George Washington University, as I was, on my emergency visit to Washington, D.C. That's an incredible moment of realization, incredible in a very sad way, of many people around the world. The demonstrations that call from the river to the sea and glory to our martyrs alongside ceasefire now are basically saying we're going to call for the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jews, the charter of the Hamas, like Mein Kampf, and at the same time we're going to deny the Jewish nation state not only the ability but the responsibility to defend itself because we're calling for a ceasefire now. And that is happening simultaneously, as we've seen online, on university campuses, on the streets around the world, attacking Jews at those demonstrations in all of those spaces.
Just recently, I think it was last week, we published an article about I think there's a bookstore in Sweden, or not a bookstore, it was a library. Exactly, in Arabic. So it was like, it was the whole issue is kind of, blurring or mixing up with all those people that don't love Jews very much.
The understanding that the same ideology that dehumanized and demonized and applied double standards to the individual Jew, barring him or her from an equal place in society, and ultimately enabling or fueling the atrocities of the Holocaust, have actually seen this mutated modern form that I was referring to, this strain of anti-Zionism that demonizes and delegitimizes and applies double standards to the proverbial Jew among the nation states, among the nations, that is the state of Israel, of course. So that understanding, and you're right, that Mein Kampf intersects very much with what we saw, with a couple of things that I want to note. First of all, we just marked 85 years to Kristallnacht. 85 years that actually were this moment that could have predicted, and I'll say prevented, the atrocities of what came after. And 10/7, exactly. And 10/7 is a moment in time that is just like Kristallnacht, this moment that gives not only a huge responsibility, but the prospective commitment, shared responsibility for never again as right now, is a really important understanding that we have to be able to make accessible and convey the urgency of, not only to Jews around the world that see maybe in many cases what they didn't see before 10/7, see clearly now, but I would argue actually is a shared responsibility, because 10/7 was not just a war waged on the state of Israel. It is not just an attack on Jews around the world in the wake of those atrocities on 10/7. It actually is a war on our shared foundational principles of life and of liberty, on our shared humanity, on civilization as we know it. Hamas is a genocidal terror organization, but one proxy of an Islamic genocidal terror regime in Iran that has, alongside other proxies around the borders of Israel, the continued declared intention to annihilate the state of Israel and to murder Jews. So in that sense, the fact that there are around the world a denial, a justification, a support, and an attack of Jews in communities, and we would be remiss if we didn't mention Paul Kessler, murdered in LA in a demonstration holding an Israeli flag. The understanding that in 2023, Jews are attacked in their homes, that homes are marked with Magen Davids, with Stars of David, that
people
Jews
hiding their
are targeted.
mezuzah on their door. Yeah.
or exactly, or removing mezuzot from
Removing, right.
mezuzot, or students that are being locked into university spaces or afraid to enter university spaces or being told to enter or leave through back doors. This is a moment of reckoning. And as I said, it is not just a moment for Jews or for the state of Israel. We are on the front lines and we may be the bloody canary in the mine shaft. But in that never again understanding, and the understanding that history does repeat itself, we know that ultimately the mine shaft will collapse. And that's why when we reference the 85 years to Kristallnacht, it's very important that we engage this moment with the utmost sense of existential urgency and responsibility.
So, I mean, being in your role, it's also a pretty new role. You're the second special envoy. I from what I understand, it's not that there's so much authority, yet you have the visibility and the mandate to speak up and to represent the state of Israel. But so what can the state of Israel do, right, in this type of situation? Because again, we're talking about most of the countries that Jews live in are democratic countries, right? We're not going to send the IDF to guard a synagogue or a Jewish school, right? We can't legally. So what can we do?
So I'll share with you, and I mentioned that I'm a member of a coalition of special envoys, but I have a special role because I'm the special envoy, as you mentioned, for combating anti-Semitism appointed by the state of Israel. And as the state of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, I am the special envoy for combating anti-Semitism for Jews around the world. And it's with that urgency that I actually got on a plane just days after we buried actually our best friend's son, recognizing and knowing that there was going to be a tsunami of anti-Semitism that would deny and justify. I didn't imagine the magnitude, I have to be very honest, and also that it would just take days, not decades like the Holocaust, days to deny and justify and to support. But what's important in that context is, having engaged along the years, whether it's from an academic front or as a legislator or tracking the international institutions, the weaponization of international law that I referred to, what's important is to engage all of those fronts in which that war has been raging with a very critical resource. And that is, of course, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. The 10-7 made very clear for those that were not sure before that anti-Zionism, or the negation of Israel's very right to exist in any borders, right? 1948, not 1967. Anti-Zionism is the current modern mutated strain of an ever mutating virus that has survived over thousands of years by latching onto the guiding social constructs of the time, and that anybody who is serious, whether I've met the second gentleman or mayors or police commissioners or presidents and chancellors of universities or my engagements with social media platforms, anybody who is serious about identifying and combating anti-Semitism cannot do so without the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition that enables to identify and combat this current strain of anti-Semitism. And as we've all become experts in viruses and the way they mutate post-COVID, we understand that it's not helpful or it's not enough if we identify and combat the old strains of a virus. We have to be able to identify and combat comprehensively, including new strains of a virus, if we're going to be able to stop it from festering and infecting our societies, our spaces, and our countries. Ultimately, basically, I would say, threatening the foundations of democracies, as we have seen in multiple spaces. So you are right that entering this role only a few weeks before the war, I'll say, is an awesome responsibility and humbling responsibility. It is true that I was able to hit the ground running because of my previous work and to be able to continue engaging with the various forums and individuals that I was, over the years was in contact with.
Or doing, yeah. Thank you very much, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you very much, Zvika.
Danny Dayan is the chairman of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. Prior to his position at Yad Vashem, he served as Israel's consul general in New York and as chairman of the Yesha Council. Yad Vashem has long understood the need to educate about the Holocaust as a tool for combating anti-Semitism, and Dayan has taken this mission on himself. He will be interviewed today by Avi Meir, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post.
Danny Dayan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You are looking at what's happening now in the world, the rise of anti-Semitism, from your unique perch as the head of Yad Vashem. What are you seeing and what is most troubling you at this time?
Well, there are many troubling issues. You know, the anti-Semitism is rampant from the airports of Dagestan in the Russian Federation to one of the most iconic symbols of modern culture, the Opera House in Sydney, where people chanted at the steps of the Opera House, "Gas the Jews," no less than that. From Cornell University, where a professor said he was exhilarated by the massacre of October 7th, to Rome, Italy, where memorials for the Holocaust were desecrated. So it's difficult to pinpoint which one is the worst. But in my opinion, the most troubling manifestation of the new anti-Semitism is what I would call its academization. I see a kind of pseudo-academization of anti-Semitism, thinly veiled as anti-Zionism. Basically, I just returned from a tour of Ivy League campuses in America. I met both with Jewish students and with administrators, presidents, and provosts and deans. And what I see is a process that didn't start now, but is accelerated now, of in the most prestigious academic institutions of the United States, in Europe also, they are building stone by stone, piece by piece, article by article, book by book, the pseudo-academic, the pseudo-intellectual justification for the elimination of the State of Israel. Basically, the genocide of Jews, because what will happen with the Jews if Palestine becomes free from the river to the sea, we saw a glimpse on October 7th. And that for me is the most worrying thing because, eventually what I believe that to a great extent what moved these worlds are ideas. And here they are building a pseudo-scientific advocacy, not only justification, but advocacy for action to eliminate Israel, from wipe Israel off the map.
You talk about anti-Zionism being a thin veil for anti-Semitism, but there are many who would say that advocating for Israel's elimination is a legitimate political perspective. What makes that anti-Semitic to you?
Look, I heard that from presidents of very prestigious universities, First Amendment, freedom of speech, academic freedom. And, Avi, imagine a professor, a sociology professor, that develops a scientific theory, an academic theory that justifies blackface. Or a sociology professor that develops, or a whole department that develops a theory that justifies and advocates for ostracizing LGBTQ persons. They also lie under the wings of freedom of speech and academic freedom. But you and I know that they will be fired the following day. On the other hand, when they advocate for the elimination of the Jewish state, they have a good chance of being promoted. And that is the big difference.
Danny, you at Yad Vashem have taken a very strong stand against comparisons between the events of October 7th and the Holocaust. What is that distinction, and why was it important for you to say so?
I think there is one important distinction that makes all the difference: the existence of the State of Israel, the existence of the IDF. In the Holocaust, the Jewish people was at the mercy of its enemies, at the mercy of others. Will they, even of our allies, will they bomb the railways to Auschwitz or not? And here, in spite of the fact that the IDF came late, but it came, the IDF came, and Israel will exert a price, a very heavy price, from the perpetrators of this massacre. So that's the difference. If I would say that if we claim that what we saw in October 7th in southern Israel is the Holocaust, then the members of the intervention teams in the kibbutzim or the Shaldag soldiers were Mordechai Anilevich and Pavel Frenkel in Warsaw Ghetto. No, because Mordechai Anilevich and Pavel Frenkel fought only for Jewish pride. They have no chance to prevail. we fought here and we repelled eventually our enemies. So it's a complete different issue. But I think that even by making the comparison, we play into the hands of Hamas. Because what Hamas wants is to terrorize us, to traumatize us. And there is no higher trauma or terror than feel that we are in the midst of the Shoah. So even from a practical point of view, I think it's a grave mistake to do that equation.
So acknowledging that there's no comparison between the events of October 7th and the Holocaust, we've nevertheless seen a phenomenon that is very reminiscent of Holocaust denial, and that is the denial of those events, tearing down posters, denying that the events even happened. You at Yad Vashem are at the forefront of efforts against Holocaust denial. What lessons can we learn from that effort to combat the denial of the atrocities of October 7th?
Well, first of all, it's also important to note that any historical comparison is to compare the similarities and the differences. Mm-hmm. There are similarities, by the way, also. The cruelty was similar to the cruelty displayed by the Nazis. In some cases, probably it was higher. But that, in the overall comparison, it's important also to know the differences. Look, we have to tell the story as we continuously continue to tell the story of the Shoah in a myriad of ways that are adapted to different audiences, to different ages, to different cultures, to different geographical locations. We have also here to do it constantly. I think that in that sense, I think that Israel is doing a good job in showing the atrocities. Eventually there is no better way to convince that something happened than showing it.
Dan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Avi.
Adam Milstein is an Israeli-American investor and philanthropist who's taken upon himself the mission of fighting growing anti-Semitism through multiple endeavors. He'll be interviewed today by Maayan Hoffman, Deputy CEO and Senior Correspondent at the Jerusalem Post.
So I have with me here today Adam Milstein, who is a regular, I would say, with us at the Jerusalem Post, somebody who has worked closely with us in the battle to fight against anti-Semitism. Adam, I want to start by asking you, what factors contribute to the recent surge in anti-Semitism since October 7th? And how are these factors different than what we saw before?
Thank you, Maayan. It's a pleasure being here with you again. As you said, I'm a regular and I'm very proud of it. And I thank the Jerusalem Post for being a voice for the fight against anti-Semitism and strengthening the state of Israel. So, what happened on October 7 was terrible. Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis, injured more than 7,000, raped women, killed baby, burned baby, chopped the heads of babies, and it seems like instead of huge support for the state of Israel, we see huge increase in anti-Semitism worldwide, and it really surprising many people. But I don't think it surprises me because I've been talking about the rise of anti-Semitism. I've been speaking about it, and I've been writing on it here on the Jerusalem Post. If you check my author page at the Jerusalem Post, you see that starting maybe 2016, I already spoke about the fact that anti-Semitism is not just coming from the far right, it's coming also from the far left. I spoke about the new kind of anti-Semitism, which is led by the Islamo-Leftist Alliance. I spoke about the danger, not just to Jews, the danger for America from the Islamo-Leftist Alliance. I spoke about the perfect storm of anti-Semitism and the fact that we need to be aware, awake, and to fight back. I also spoke about why Jews don't want to fight back, are not capable of fighting back. And we can talk about it too. I don't think it's much different today. And I also spoke about if we present anti-Semitism as a Jewish problem, we will never be able to fight back. We need to illustrate to the West and to America that this is an American problem, and we need to align ourselves with our American allies and fight back against the enemies of America. I spoke about the danger of the media. I spoke about the danger of radical education ideologies like CRT, the critical race theory, and the DEI, and others. So I've been speaking about a lot, and I'm not surprised from what I'm saying right now. In fact, if I look at the previous conflict that we had between Israel and Hamas, there was one in 2014. I think we called it, forgot the name, and started at that time, we started having big waves of anti-Semitism. It exploded 10 times more in 2021 in the Guardian of the Wall. The first one was Protect Edge. Guardian of the Wall, it just exploded. Jewish students were locked into the dorm, were afraid to go out. People with Jewish clothes were afraid to walk on the streets, and the Jewish community was outraged. But as soon as the war was over, in June of 2021, everything just went back to normal. Jews went back to their businesses, to their family, and we forgot about the fact anti-Semitism growing like crazy. And now we're in October, November of 2023. It's exploding. The Jewish community is waking up, and I just hopeful that this awakening is not just going to last another month after the war is over, but it will wake the Jews and it will wake America. Because as I said many times, this is not about the Jews. We're just the canary in the coal mine. This is about America and the West. We need to understand that anti-Semitism today is different from what it used to be in previous centuries. In the past, hatred toward the Jews came from hatred to our race, if we are a race, hatred to our religious, to our clothes, and this hatred toward Jews have led to blood libel, to prosecution, to massacres, to pogroms, and the Holocaust. But today, while the old classical anti-Semitism is still in place and being promoted by the far right, it's really a poisonous anti-Semitism that is being led since the beginning of this century by the Islamo-Leftist Alliance, an alliance between the radical left and Muslims, secular Muslims, that together created an alliance against the West, against Israel, and against religion. And this coalition, who actually started in the United States in the 1980s in institution of higher education, today is the leader and promoter of all the radical ideologies that are taking over the campuses, taking over corporate America, the media, and every place else. They're an extreme danger to America, but just picking up, in this case, on Israel and the Jews. You know, in 2020 with the BLM riots, they picked up on the police, and they're just picking up an issue, and they're becoming more and more violent and more dangerous. And this hatred is going to actually be pushed against America. You see, the way they think is that it's coming from this notion of intersectionality, which goes and say that all the victims in the world, all the oppressed, all the people that are powerless should unite and together fight against their common enemies. It doesn't have to be from the beginning one enemy. The Muslim bring Israel and America. The radical left bring America and Western values. And together, as a coalition, they're fighting against what they call oppressors, the powerful, the colonial, the imperialist, and together they are determined to destroy America and build something back better. Not sure what it means, but this is what they want to destroy America. And in this moment, they're focusing on Israel and the Jews. But think about it. If the students on the universities feel that they can justify Hamas for killing Jews because Hamas, which they also connect to Palestinians, they're oppressed, they suffer from the occupation of Israel. What is going to stop those students tomorrow come and kill Americans? It's the same logic. A white privilege, the one that enjoy from the racist system, they're the oppressors, and the victims need to stand up and use any means possible to destroy their oppressors. So what we're looking right now is just a training field, and tomorrow we'll see all those movements on campus and beyond coming and trying to kill and destroy America.
So in what ways has social media played into all of this? You know, we're talking about the modern anti-Semitism in the modern era. So obviously social media must also play a role. And I'm wondering if there's any specific actions that can be taken in order to counter what's happening, not only in the physical sphere, but also in the digital sphere.
Excellent question. Before I move to the social media, I just want to, I think, highlight a first campaign of anti-Semitism that the Islamo-leftist alliance engaged in. We are familiar with the BDS movement. It started by Palestinian terror organization in 2001, but it was adopted by Islamo-leftist alliance here in the United States, and they promoted it on campus and beyond as a way to actually fight for Palestinian rights, fight against the occupation, fight against the oppression, the war crime that Israel is committed. But if it wasn't for the Islamic leftist alliance or for the radical left on campus, the BDS would have never been what it is today. And remember, the BDS is the one who started with the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is a call to kill Jews in Israel and now worldwide. And it was never, should have been allowed on campus and beyond. In fact, you know, one of the problem is many Jews actually defended the BDS and promoted the BDS. And not only did they help to change public opinion in America against Israel, it also split the Jewish community. And we had many in the Jewish community that were criticizing Israel every day. Those Jews that have been criticizing Israel maybe are realizing today that anti-Semitism doesn't distinguish between a good Jew and a bad Jew, a right Jew and a left Jew. All Jews, with no distinguishment, are going to go on the train and go to Auschwitz. And they're starting to realize that the fact that they have supported the enemies of the Israel and the Jews is going to come back and shoot them in the back. Let's talk about social media. I think social media today is a major factor in the promotion of anti-Semitism. I think the world altogether has changed in the last 60, 40, and 20 years. First of all, we have social media, and we did not have social media before. If before, an article in the newspaper would have taken a week, a month to reach 1,000 people or 10,000 people, today you have billions of people on social media, and every piece of news or misinformation or disinformation or propaganda get immediately, within a second, to the eyes of hundreds of millions of people. So today, social media is huge. All the young generation are getting majority of their news from social media. Young generation below the age of 50, below the age of 20, are getting 50% of their news from social media. And while the numbers are maybe coming, decreasing, over 30 is maybe 30%, and over 50 is maybe 15%, the numbers of people getting the news from social media is increasing every day. And the problem with social media is that social media is not censored. Kind of misinformation, disinformation, propaganda is not only allowed on social media, it's actually being promoted. The more hate that you spew, the more attention the algorithms are going to give you. And if in general on social media, for every pro-Israel activist, maybe we have 100 anti-Israel activists. When it comes to hate, I think for every pro-Israel activist, which does not use hate as much, we have at least 1,000 anti-Israel that spew hate and promote violence. And unfortunately, not only their content is not being censored, it's not being verified, it's actually being promoted by the algorithms. So I think we have a huge problem. We also need to look at who is funding social media, who is behind social media. So we know that TikTok is a Chinese company, and China is the #1 rivalry of the United States that is aiming on taking over the superpower of the world from the United States. And they would like to do it from within. They would like to brainwash the heads of young Americans. And I think they're doing a phenomenal job. And TikTok is just prospering like crazy. There is like 1.5 billion users on TikTok and maybe 100 million accounts here in the United States. And most of the hatred on social media is coming over TikTok. Minimum censorship. Also, all the enemies of America, if they don't actually sponsor a social media, they're heavily invested in social media. They have their propaganda channels on social media. Look at AJ Plus, which belong to Al Jazeera, which belong to Qatar. They promote hatred to America and Israel on social media, and they have millions of followers. We know that those countries, whether it's Qatar, Iran, Russia, China, they pay influencer to spread hatred toward America, hatred toward the United States, and hatred toward Israel. And so the fact that social media is not really censored or controlled is a huge problem. And I just don't see how we're going to be able to stop this promotion of hatred and violence on social media.
So since October 7th, do you feel like the rise in anti-Semitism and the vitriol aimed at Israel is a sign of something greater?
Absolutely. I've written about it many times. I wrote that anti-Semitism is actually an American problem, because if you look at who are the anti-Semites today, the far right, but most of the anti-Semitism today is promoted by the Islamologist Alliance. Those alliance of Islamists and people from the left, as I said, want to destroy America and build something else better. Nobody knows what exactly better will mean, but they are destroying America through the education system, through the critical race theory ideologies and the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI and ethnic studies. And they penetrated corporate America with cancel culture and wokeness. They're controlling the media. They already have presence in the Congress. They are working day and night to destroy the United States of America, to destroy Western value, to destroy religious value, to destroy family values. And their hatred toward Israel and the Jews is just one of the issues that they are fighting against. But we are not the first and the utmost target. The first and the utmost target of the Islamo-Leftist Alliance is the United States of America and Western civilization. So when you see this huge spike in anti-Semitism, we need to understand that everything that's happening today is going to happen 10 times more against American and Western civilization countries. This is a sign for the future.
Thank you so much.
Talor Cohen-Montemayor is the CEO of Cyberwell, which created and maintains the world's first live database of anti-Semitic content on social media. She'll be interviewed by Tamar Uriel Berry, managing editor of jpost.com.
Talor, thank you for joining us today. It's clear to anybody who's using social media these days that anti-Semitism is on the rise, specifically on platforms that we all use on the day-to-day, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, so on and so forth. Cyberwell has recently released a report about the rise in anti-Semitism since October 7th. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So this report is actually a meta-analysis of the online compliance work that Cyberwell has been doing. Cyberwell is the first ever open database of online anti-Semitism using open source intelligence techniques and AI to track online anti-Semitism in real time across these major social media platforms that you mentioned. So if we look at the data, we see a clear surge in online Jew hatred following October 7th. Cyberwell systems tracked an 86% increase in online anti-Semitism across the board, with one of the highest increases being on Facebook at 193% increase of highly likely to be anti-Semitic content on Facebook specifically. Additionally, I can tell you in a little bit more detail that there's a clear surge not only in online anti-Semitism, but calls to violence against Jews, specifically in Arabic, where there was an increase from very small percentages of calls to violence against Jews in our data to over 26% of that data being clear outward violence and justifying killing of Jews online.
Wow. And so this is coming from many different directions, but especially surrounding the Israel-Hamas war that's currently occurring. This is coming from, for the most part, Hamas. So can you explain how they're doing this? Does Hamas have bots? How are they hijacking, as you mentioned in your report, social media?
Right. So absolutely, I say that not only were we caught by surprise on October 7th and the IDF and the Israeli government, but the social media platforms were really caught by surprise at their lack of readiness to deal with this type of terror attack that actually hijacked our major social media platforms to use them as tools of psychological warfare against us. So what did they do? Hamas extrapolated on the ISIS tactic of using digital to video their killings and actually live stream those videos. So we had an instance of a live stream of the kidnapping and execution of a family on Facebook. We had violent videos showing women being dragged through the streets in Gaza after being raped, a live lynching that was posted onto Twitter. So these are things that are extremely violent, but really should give us pause. And what I mean by should give us pause, they're national security issues. Okay, at this point, there are other terror organizations that saw what Hamas did, abusing the lack of readiness on the part of the social media platforms to automatically remove this content, and now are abusing that as well. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a massive 800 people were killed by a jihadi group in Darfur. What did they do with that content? They went ahead and uploaded it onto social media. Those are direct notes from Hamas's tactics of using these social media platforms.
Are there any social media platforms that are being used in particular more than others, that have more lax policies?
I would say that the video platforms are under probably more vulnerability than others. So TikTok and YouTube, because a lot of times you're seeing videos jump from chat platforms like Telegram directly onto those platforms. But really, we've seen this increase across the board. The video content itself tends to be much more viral, but there's a whole issue around misinformation and disinformation, calls to violence. And we've seen in Cyberwell's data even a 50% increase in classic anti-Semitism that's not war-related as a result of this onslaught of terror against Jews.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like policies of these different social media companies in order to prevent this kind of extremist content to be shared, which are doing the best, which are doing the worst, which is Cyberwell keeping a bigger eye on?
So since launching our platform in May 2022, Cyberwell has been onboarded as a trusted partner of Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and we're open to working with more platforms and working behind the scenes in order to get those direct partnerships. This means that we're working directly with content moderation teams and policy teams to drive the enforcement and improvement of their digital policies, the way that they're handling online anti-Semitism. I can tell you, just anecdotally from our work directly, the most collaborative platform, oddly enough, has been TikTok. They had a roundtable with a bunch of Jewish nonprofits talking about what they're doing in the space. We got a chance to speak directly to their product teams and to their engineers, and we're working with them behind the scenes in order to improve their ability to monitor online anti-Semitism also in the comments section.
So are there any practices that should be adopted immediately according to the data collected by Cyberwell?
Yes, absolutely. So the Cyberwell report really goes, it's kind of a guidebook for these social media platforms and their content moderation teams on how to improve the way that they're monitoring online anti-Semitism. One thing I can tell you, full stop, is that there was such a gap highlighted post-October 7th that there is no investment in content moderation in Arabic. And actually the flood of violent anti-Semitic content post-October 7th online was absolutely in Arabic. So our report also includes a number of keywords, including religious keywords that promote religious anti-Semitism, on how these platforms can more effectively stop the spread of Jew hatred on their platforms.
Well, where do you see the potential solutions kind of coming into effect, let's say on a people-to-people basis, in how people use social media?
Well, I think that we look a lot at the platforms and the way that they, as the stage managers of these platforms, can actually improve. But on a people-to-people basis, I would just encourage people to be careful. Any information, any video that claims to be coming out of Gaza, you should really look at that twice and give yourself some time. Always verify any information you're seeing on social media via other news sources, multiple news sources. You know, social media, unfortunately, is being used as the #1 news source for most people under the age of 30. It is not a news source. If anything, it's a way to see how people are reacting to the news, right? If you're looking for genuine information, take yourself some time, look at a reliable news source. And as a human being using social media today, try to be kinder. If you see people hating on one another, intervene, stop them, support people who are getting hate online, and don't contribute to the noise.
Right. I think part of the issue is that people are saying, well, I am finding these legitimate sources, I'm just getting to them through social media. But social media does have these algorithms that, let's say, going to one news site or several news sites doesn't have. So what would you recommend then?
100%. So what you should understand about social media is they are trying to reinforce your bias, right? It's called silo reinforcement. TikTok released a statement saying, if you're looking at pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian content, you're going to be shown more of that content. And that's the truth of any social media platform.
Right, it's creating a sort of echo chamber.
It's creating an echo chamber. It's creating a reinforced bias. And unfortunately, the way that algorithms work is that they're meant to grab your attention. So they're also exposing you to more violent content, to more hateful content, to content that's going to cause you or legitimize the idea that you're supposed to react in a violent way or hostile way against somebody. So take breaks from social media. Do not allow it to be your primary source of information. And I would also really encourage people to continue to report hate online when they see it. That's exactly what Cyberwell does using AI and using technology. We also act as an escalator for crowdsourced reporting. People can come to Cyberwell, send us content online, and we will escalate that through our reports to the social media platforms.
So you mentioned AI, obviously the kind that you use is far different than the kind that is being used, say, on ChatGPT and other such applications. In those specific circumstances, there's also concern of anti-Semitic rhetoric being used in how these AI algorithms present information. How would you go about handling that?
100%. So I think that generative AI presents risks and solutions. On the risk level, of course, you have these AI models consuming a tremendous amount of online information with very little breaks. So they're also consuming anti-Semitic content online, anti-Israel biased content, and potentially are putting that into their output for things like ChatGPT. On the solutions level, what Cyberwell is actually doing, the natural outgrowth of the work that we're doing monitoring online anti-Semitism on these platforms, is creating what's called high integrity data sets. So really great data on what is anti-Semitism, what isn't anti-Semitism, and how does it behave. So our next phase for Cyberwell is really taking the same process that we made with social media trust and safety teams and extending that to the major AI platforms, giving them that information so that we can ensure that these algorithms are not going to be promoting or putting out more anti-Semitism into the world.
Right, but in the meantime, that's simply what's being put out. And I think that social media platforms are facing the issue of it's happening to such a large extent, and there's so much content that there's only so much that they can do to prevent it. And I'm sure that Cyberwell is experiencing that as well. So let's talk best case scenario and worst case scenario. Best case scenario, social media platforms apply the correct filters and necessary precautions in order to prevent this kind of content being shared online. How do you see that affecting anti-Semitic rhetoric online in the long term, and vice versa, if they don't behave as necessary?
Right. So I think the worst case scenario is that not only the platforms do nothing, but that governments do nothing, that they don't recognize that this was a turning point when it comes to the national security threat that all social media platforms pose by being a direct tool of psychological warfare by a terrorist group. The governments need to pay attention to this. They need to take more aggressive action when it comes to the requirements of what social media platforms are required to disclose and also enforce on their own platforms. That's the worst case scenario, is that not only social media doesn't do anything, but the government doesn't do anything. The best case scenario is that we take the data the content, the videos that surged and overwhelmed the platforms following October 7th, and we learn from it, right? So we're taking those videos and we're actually implementing them using generative AI to do automatic detection. In a very similar way, social media platforms have done the same thing when it comes to songs and identifying copyright violation or even child pornography. We need to apply the same generative AI tools on the violent content that we saw on October 7th to prevent snuff videos, right? The lust of the death of Jews, pornographizing the death of Jews on these social media platforms. But really, that's all what Cyberwell is about, not only from the video perspective, from the content perspective. We're literally going through this content. We are identifying the surges in online anti-Semitism. We're giving the data points in terms of the keywords, the hashtags that these social media platforms need to more effectively reduce the presence of Jew hatred on their platforms.
Talora, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'd now like to introduce Lior Erez, Executive Director of Stop Antisemitism. The organization is best known for its annual Anti-Semite of the Year award. Lior will be interviewed by Steve Lindy, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Report.
Lior Erez, Executive Director of Stop Antisemitism. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about your organization and how the landscape of anti-Semitism has changed since October the 7th.
Thrilled to be here with you guys. Stop Anti-Semitism is one of the leading Jewish advocacy groups in the United States fighting anti-Semitism. We expose those that seek to do harm to the Jewish people and nation. We create consequences for those that espouse hatred, again, towards the Jewish people and nation. And I'm thrilled to be here. Regarding how the landscape has changed since October 7th, that gruesome, gruesome day, honestly, all the masks have come off. Anti-Semites around the world are using this massacre to air their grievances against the Jewish state as a fig leaf of their hate. We've seen doctors, we've seen lawyers, activists, teachers, all reveal their bigotry, showing just how pervasive, Jew hatred is in our broader communities. If this were really about Israel, synagogues would not be vandalized, Jewish students would not be targeted, and hostage posters of kidnapped children would not be ripped down.
How do you see anti-Semitism in social media relating to anti-Semitic incidents themselves?
That's a great question. We feel they go directly hand in hand. Hamas intentionally used social media to broadcast their horrific brutality and use it as a weapon of psychological warfare, a vile act that nevertheless has been celebrated by terror sympathizers all around the world, shockingly. Social media posts have been a massive engine for misinformation, with Hamas supporters employing footage from other conflicts, out of context clips, and doctored footage to gin up sympathy for their supposed resistance. Social media firms have a responsibility to crack down on this activity, and the groundswell of anti-Semitic and pro-terror context online continues to ferment violence against Jews on a global scale.
You mentioned removing hostage posters as a flashpoint. Why do you see this as important?
So the posters are a frank reminder of the depths of Hamas's cruelty and a primary reason that Israel is waging a war against this brutal, savage group. They're a call to conscience, demanding that we not look away from the victims of actual evil in 2023. Ripping down posters indicates a callous disregard for the suffering of Jewish hostages and their families, an affront to human dignity that cannot help but be anti-Semitic. Imagine how much hate it takes to rip down a poster of a missing baby. It's unfathomable to us.
Amid the rise of anti-Semitism that we're witnessing, what do you think is the role of schools and universities in protecting their Jewish students?
They need to be louder. They need to be more unequivocal in their support of Jewish students. Jewish students across the country, if not the world, are facing an onslaught of anti-Semitism from their fellow peers, from professors, from administrators. Universities need to honor their Title VI commitment to protect their Jewish students and provide them with the appropriate security and mental health resources. They need to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism so they actually know what they're fighting. And they need to employ their full range of disciplinary tools against anyone who harasses, intimidates, dehumanizes, or creates an otherwise hostile environment for Jewish students, which we're just not seeing happen.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider to be the most dangerous trend in anti-Semitism?
So we have to say that it's the false equivalence between Hamas's terrorism and the global struggle for social justice. It's surreal to see younger generations believe that they're on the side of oppressed as they celebrate anti-Semitic savagery, terrorism, the beheading of babies, the raping of women. It's honestly unfathomable for this to be happening in 2023. If you stand for peace, equality, human rights, you can only stand with the Jewish nation in this scenario.
For people asking themselves, what can we do? How do you advise individuals on what they can do to help fight anti-Semitism in their own communities?
We urge them to show up, be loud in their support of Jews and the Jewish nation. We urge non-Jews to reach out to their Jewish friends. We urge everyone to go to pro-Israel demonstrations and rallies in their communities. If you can, donate to Jewish and Israeli charities, but most of all, do not turn a blind eye to what's happening. It's not complicated. It's not political. This is a savage terror group raining hell on innocent people and a democratic country. Overall, if you see something, say something.
And let me ask you this. What do you think Israel can do to help you in the diaspora?
We need more support, specifically on the governmental and university levels from various ministries and Knesset members. We need, honestly, more dialogue with our community members. Perhaps it's not known just how inflammatory and hostile it is in the United States, so definitely more support is needed.
So in conclusion, Leora, what is your best advice in the fight against anti-Semitism? What are the best ways to combat it?
Be loud and proud with your Judaism. Show up. If there's something that you see that just doesn't sit well with you, report it to Stop Anti-Semitism. We want to know about it. People can reach us at stopAntiSemitism.org. They can view us on social media channels. We're reaching nearly 500 million people across our social media channels, newsletter, and website. If you see something anti-Semitic, we want to hear about it. Again, we're one of the leading organizations fighting anti-Semitism, creating consequences for anti-Semites that includes firing, suspensions, expulsions. And one thing that we want everyone to know, we stand with the Jewish people and nation no matter what.
Leora Erez, thank you so much for joining us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Our next guest is Congressman Richie Torres, who has been one of America's strongest voices in condemning anti-Semitism. He will be interviewed today by Avi Meir, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post.
Congressman Richie Torres, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's an honor to be here.
You know, a couple weeks ago, another Israeli publication that shall remain unnamed had a headline that was, "Who is Representative Richie Torres and why does he support Israel?" So let me ask you that question. Who is Representative Richie Torres and why does he support Israel?
Well, I'm Richie Torres from the Bronx. I'm a member of Congress, and I support Israel because it's the right thing to do. Because America has no greater ally in the Middle East than the state of Israel. There's no country in the Middle East that's more protective of minority rights and LGBTQ rights and women's rights. And I'm a Zionist. I believe in the vision of Israel as a sanctuary for the Jewish people. For me, the Holocaust was the seminal moral catastrophe of the 20th century. And as a student of history, I feel the world has long failed the Jewish community. When you consider the long and ugly history of anti-Semitism, crusades and inquisitions and pogroms and genocide and ethnic cleansing. And so I think we have a moral obligation to never fail the Jewish community again. And part of never failing is supporting the survival and security of Israel as a Jewish state.
Now, Congressman, your voice has been one that I think has offered many Israelis and many Jews a great deal of comfort during this time. You've often been a lone voice in some quarters in favor of Israel and in favor of the Jewish community. Can you talk about that dynamic? What's it like operating, particularly in progressive spaces, as a pro-Israel member of Congress?
Look, the tragic fact is that there's no issue on which I face more hate and harassment and death threats than on the subject of Israel. I mean, even my own mother has faced harassment because of my pro-Israel advocacy. But I feel as motivated as I've ever been to speak out against anti-Semitism. And I'm commonly asked, why, as a gay Afro-Latino from the Bronx, am I so outspoken against anti-Semitism? And people are asking me the wrong question. The right question is not, why have I chosen to be outspoken? The right question is why others have chosen silence in the face of the deadliest state for Jews since the Holocaust.
You know, Congressman, you described yourself earlier on as a Zionist. And in the perception of many Jews and supporters of Israel, anti-Zionism is regarded as a form of anti-Semitism. Can you talk about whether you share that view? Is anti-Zionism a form of anti-Semitism, and why do you think that is?
Well, it's one thing to be a non-Zionist, to be indifferent to Israel, right? There's nothing anti-Semitic about non-Zionism. But if you're an anti-Zionist, right, if you're actively antagonistic for the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, then that to me does cross the line into anti-Semitism. Israel is home to half of the world's Jewish population. And if you are advocating for the destruction of the home of the largest Jewish community in the world, if that is not anti-Semitic, then I'm not sure what would be.
Congressman, you have often been not only a lone voice in your party, but in many other respects as well. I think you've been identified by many as one of the most stalwart voices for Israel and for the Jewish community in America. How have you navigated that reality? Is that something you sort of set out to do when you entered Congress? Did you see yourself as being that voice for Israel in Congress, or it's something that sort of developed along the way?
By the time I ran for Congress, I had fully formed views on Israel. The first time I ever had an opportunity to travel abroad was a delegation to Israel. So I've been traveling to Israel for about 10 years. I've been thinking and writing and speaking about the subject for about 10 years, and it's become a critical cause in my life. And I make no apologies for it. And I happen to represent a vibrant Jewish community in Riverdale. And the number one priority for many of my Jewish constituents at the moment is Israel and the fight against anti-Semitism. And I'm proud to be their voice in Congress and beyond.
Congressman, in the perception of many in the Jewish community, anti-Semitism is seen as coming from multiple sources. It comes from the far right, traditionally. It also now comes, as you know, from the far left, and it comes from extremists claiming to act in the name of Islam. Realizing those multiple sources, and perhaps there are others as well, how do we combat it? What can we do to most effectively combat the scourge of Jew hatred coming from multiple sources?
I think we have to be consistent in condemning anti-Semitism. We have to be careful not to politicize anti-Semitism. There are those on the far right who only speak out against anti-Semitism from the left. And then there are those on the far left who only speak out against anti-Semitism on the right. And we have a moral obligation to speak out against both, to speak out against anti-Semitism, no matter what form it takes, no matter what ideological direction from which it comes. Consistency in condemning and speaking out against anti-Semitism is the key to creating a culture of anti-Semitism.
Congressman, you spoke about your visit to Israel, and you've spoken before about how that really shaped your view of this place and of this region and the world. Not everyone has that opportunity to come to Israel. Many do, but many do not. How can we shape the perceptions, even of those who don't have the opportunity to come here and see the reality for themselves? How can we shift the conversation in a positive direction?
Look, there is no substitute for firsthand experience with Israel, because it's one of the most complicated places on earth. It's one of the most widely misunderstood and willfully misrepresented places on earth. And so I encourage people, before rushing to judgment, you should actually go to Israel and speak to, a variety of people, both Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, both Israelis and Palestinians, and expose yourself to the facts on the ground. But in the absence of direct experience, education is the key. And there's not only a lack of knowledge about Israel, there's tragically a lack of knowledge about the history of oppression against Jews. There's been a systematic effort to erase the status of Jews as minorities. There was a Pew Research study which found that the majority of Americans are not even aware of the number of Jews who died in the Holocaust. And so out of a lack of education has come a lack of empathy. And we have to solve the historical amnesia. We have to confront the historical amnesia that the public has about the experience of Jewish oppression.
President Biden and the leadership of the Democratic Party today are viewed as being solidly pro-Israel, extremely supportive of the people of Israel during this particularly challenging time. But there are many who fear that that may not be the case in 10, 15, or 20 years' time. Where do you see the trends going, and how can we, again, steer them in a proper direction?
Well, I want to complicate the premise of the question. So, support for Israel is bipartisan, but opposition to Israel is bipartisan. I see two challenges to the U.S.-Israel relationship. The isolationist impulse on the far right and the intersectionalist impulse on the far left, right? And both of those impulses can become more powerful over time. So I just want to, the notion that the Republican Party is pro-Israel and the Democratic Party is anti-Israel is a caricature of what is actually unfolding in American politics. The reality is infinitely more complicated. Both support and opposition to Israel is bipartisan.
But let me just hone in on your party then. If you look at your party, and we can acknowledge that there are challenges certainly on the other side of the aisle as well, but looking at your party and voices within the party who seem to be more hostile to Israel, do you see those voices becoming more numerous or louder? Do you feel that more people are listening to them? Or do you feel that those concerns are overblown?
Look, I think in life, you have to prepare for the worst case scenario. And I am alarmed by what I see on college campuses and on social media platforms. And if that is any indication of what is to come, then that should be cause for concern. So, if we do nothing, these trends will get worse. And so I would ask the Jewish community and the allies of the Jewish community to be proactive in engaging in politics and doing your part in sustaining the U.S.-Israel relationship, because it is facing unprecedented challenges from both the far left and the far right.
Carson Marucci-Torres, thank you so much for being with us today.
It was an honor to be here. Thank you.
And now we are going to hear from Ted Deutsch, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, AJC. Before taking that role, Deutsch was already a familiar name, as he served as a congressman representing Florida from 2010 to 2022. He became known for his pro-Israel record. Mr. Deutsch will be interviewed today by Avi Meir, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post.
Ted, thank you so much for being with us today. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the wave of anti-Semitism that we've been seeing across America and around the world. What exactly have you seen, and how has it been similar, and how has it been different than previous waves of anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, what we've seen is a dramatic, as you know, it's a dramatic spike in anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. And we've seen this before. We've seen increases in anti-Semitism. We've been dealing with challenges on social media and elsewhere. But since October 7th, we've seen this turn into something dramatically worse. There is a sense of impunity that these people have when they attack Jews. We've seen rallies with people holding up swastikas. We've seen violence against Jewish communities in the United States and around the world. We've seen vandalism against Jewish institutions and at Jewish cemeteries. We've seen people in the streets, and this is perhaps if there's something that could be most troubling, the desire of protesters to go out into the streets in the United States and around the world to march in support of Hamas terrorism and to praise what happened on October 7th. That's what has put Jews very much on edge, what has led to confrontations and violence against Jews around the world. And on so many places, college campuses in particular, Jews really feeling afraid as they walk across their campus in certain parts of the world where people are screaming at them, gas the Jews, kill the Jews. This is something that people feel that they can now speak freely about. We need to continue to work hard, not just to protect the Jewish community and to work to ensure that that stops, but to make sure that everyone is speaking out against it and that it can't be tolerated anywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about the sources of anti-Semitism. AJC has long spoken about three primary sources of anti-Semitism: the far right, the hard left, and extremists claiming to act in the name of Islam. Are those the same sources of what we're seeing in the streets today? How does it sort of differ from what we've seen in the past?
Well, we do have to continue to focus on that. And what happens, obviously, you know, is the far right and the far left, the extremes, the radical extremes often wind up essentially touching. And this is a moment where we're seeing that kind of overlap. We're seeing those on the far left who have adopted this sort of anti-Israel, violent anti-Israel creed as their politics. We've seen them marching in the streets, often in support of Hamas terrorists. We saw that with the Democratic Socialists of America, who played an active role in those early days in rallying opposition to Israel and support for Hamas. We've seen on the far right, we've seen the conspiracy theory-based anti-Semitism that has plagued and haunted the Jewish community for millennia continue to increase. And obviously, we've seen this increase among radical Islamists who, following the lead of what they're seeing in Israel, what they saw on October 7th, are somehow trying to explain away what happened when over 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered and when thousands were injured and when 10,000 or more rockets have now fallen on Israel. They try to explain that away and in turn gin up those in America and around the world to support Hamas. All of this is really coming together at the same time. That's why this is such a challenge. It's a challenge, again, that isn't just for us, those of us who are Jewish, those of us who love Israel, for us to confront alone. This is a challenge that we must confront together, because it's never, not in America and not anywhere else in the world, it's never just the Jews who are at risk when anti-Semitism rises. Ultimately, and we've seen this in the United States in violence that's broken out at protests, and we've seen this in other parts of the world. Ultimately, it's the society as a whole that is put at risk when this kind of rabid anti-Semitism is allowed to spread.
Ted, you wrote a piece recently outlining 10 ways that we can help deal a blow to anti-Semitism. Could you tell us a little bit about what those ideas are? How can we effectively combat the scourge of Jew hatred?
Well, most importantly, we need to call it out. And if I keep making this point, it's because it's so critical for us as a community. We need to call it out. We can never accept it as normal. We need to work, and we need to work with our allies, with those in the community with whom we have relations. AJC has spent a long time developing relations with other faiths, with other ethnic groups. Now is the time that we all need to lean on those groups to stand with us. That's a huge part of this. We need business leaders. We need university presidents and university leaders. We need politicians to stand with the community against anti-Semitism. And in addition to all of the other things that I talk about in there, we have to continue. This is so true in the United States right now. We have to continue to be proud Jews. I'm on my way to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where there's a horrific measure that's being voted on by the entire student body that is anti-Israel, that is anti-Semitic, that condemns the state of Israel for the attack that Hamas waged, the terror attack against it. I'm on my way there because these students, they're doing incredible things, rallying their peers to support them, and they're doing it as proud Jews. That's right now such an incredibly important thing for us to be doing, whether it's in our own homes, with our own families, in our workplaces, in our communities. That sends a strong message that we are standing together, standing strongly, and we need you to stand with us. We are proud Jews in the face of everything that we face. That's not going to change.
You know, Ted, you talk a little bit about your upcoming visit to Ann Arbor, and I know that you've spoken a great deal about the particular challenge faced on college campuses. What more can university communities and particularly administrators do to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism on their campuses?
Well, they can do a lot, and AJC has created a guide for university administrators and presidents. It's available at our website at ajc.org. We've shared it now with universities all around the country. It does a few things. It points out that in the short term, universities have to act to protect Jewish students, to make sure that they're safe. But beyond that, there are a whole series of things they need to do to make sure that the voices of Jewish students are not silenced, on their campus. This is a moment that requires moral clarity, that university presidents cannot try to thread a needle and think that somehow there's a way to stand in support of the Jewish students, in support of morality and decency in the face of what happened on October 7th, and still somehow explain away protests by students and faculty who support Hamas terrorists. There has to be a clear line that they set. Academic freedom is really important, but the most important voice on a college campus is the voice of the university president, who also is free to express himself or herself. And the president sets the tone for what is and is not acceptable on campus. They need to speak out. They need to enforce their own codes of student conduct. They need to make sure that their campuses are welcoming for everyone. And that includes the Jewish students who play such a critical part on campuses all across the United States and all around the world.
Ted, on that note, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing those valuable insights. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're now going to switch gears and focus for the last part of the conference on the Hamas massacre and the response here in the state of Israel. To kick that off, I want to invite Eli Beer, founder and president of United Hatzalah, to talk about the hidden heroes of this tragedy. He'll be interviewed by Maayan Hoffman, Deputy CEO of Strategy and Innovation and a senior correspondent for the Jerusalem Post.
So Eli, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to start by us talking about what it was like down south. I myself went down south about a week after, 2 weeks after, and 3 weeks after, and I saw what it looked like then. But I understand that you and your team with United Hatzalah were in the field under live fire on October 7th. Tell me about your wife herself was down there. So tell me what that looked like and why was United Hatzalah all alone?
Well, first of all, we got the indication very early in the morning, around 6:30. Our first volunteer was killed. He was actually a paramedic. He was working as a standby paramedic on the field in Re'im, where it was the big party. He was an Arab Muslim from Nazareth, who was a big lover of saving lives. He was an Israeli Arab who loved everyone. He called and he sent out a video to us at 6:25 of the situation. 6:30, 6:25, we already knew that they have a huge terrorist attack happening there in Re'im. And okay, that was a big terrorist attack. So we started setting our people, getting ready, waking everyone up to go help out. Then they say that Awad was just killed by a terrorist. He was murdered brutally by a terrorist he didn't want to run away from the girl. They were screaming to him, run away, the terrorists are coming. He said, I'm not leaving the girl. I'm not leaving this Jewish girl alone. He was murdered by a terrorist of Hamas. That was the first incident we had. The second one was right after in Sderot, which is a couple of miles north. And this volunteer of ours, Chaim Sassi, was on the way to shul. He was a religious Orthodox Jew on the way to pray for Simchat Torah and Shabbat. And he heard the police station was attacked. So he jumped on an ambucycle and he was on the way to the police station. And then he yells on the walkie-talkie that a terrorist is shooting at him. And he got three shots on one his face and leg and arm. He was on the floor, bleeding terribly, but he was yelling for help. And then he took out his gun when the terrorist got close to him and he shot the terrorist and killed him. So he said, I eliminated the terrorist, like I killed the terrorist. And then all of a sudden, a second later, he screams, 20 others are here. They were telling us we're under attack. So this was already, we understood it's a war. I was in the dispatch in Jerusalem at 7:15. My wife, Gitti, said to me, I'm a paramedic. I just finished my school. I'm going in. I said, if you go in, you may not come out. I said, at least wear a bulletproof vest and helmet. She carries a pistol on her for protection. Gitti, this is the time. You need to take this with you. I don't know if it's going to help. Came in, and they went back in to get more. And then we started putting ambulances are sort of going in. This is really the beginning of our journey on October 7th, unfortunately, because the enemies of Israel are still waiting to kill us.
So you talk about the enemies, but there are also the heroes. And there's so much tragedy and so much loss and so much really, so many horrific events that happened on that one day. And as you said, that day that has not really stopped since October 7th. We're 2 months into this war. But there are also the stories that you read, and there are the stories that you should read, but maybe you haven't yet. And I know, Ellie, that one of the things that's amazing with United Hatzalah, not only United Hatzalah, but one of the things that you told me about at one point was that there are heroes of this war who are just normal people on any other day. Tell me one of those stories. Tell me about one of the true heroes that you've encountered since this tragedy struck.
I have 1,200 of these heroes who went in and were there. And when ambulances started slowing down because they saw how dangerous it was, we were the only ones running in. At one point in the morning, even the National Ambulance Services were sending only armed vehicles, and they had very few. So we started sending every vehicle we had, sending them in. Our volunteers said, we don't care. If we have a war, we have the responsibility as paramedics. Yes, safety comes first. But in this situation, if they can't depend on paramedics and EMTs, the country's over. And thank God for the soldiers who went in under fire and some of them got killed. Thank God for United Hatzalah who went in under fire without armed vehicles. We didn't even have one armed vehicle. We just went in. We wore bulletproof vests and helmets, hoping that would help. But we said, this is a time to act. This is a time to fight for the country. We're back in 1948. And I could tell you a lot of them. One of them was Chaim Sassi, who I told you was the first one in Sderot who was injured. And he was laying there for 2.5 hours trying to save his own life. He had one bandage in his pocket because his ambucycle, the motorcycle that he uses, the Hatzalah ambucycle, was nearby. He couldn't get there. He was on the floor, injured. And there was some fire above his head. But he saw a policeman next to him. And he tried saving him. He was killed. But the next, and a little further away, he had a policeman who was injured. And then he was able to save that policeman and stop, and with a tourniquet, stop that guy. He's bleeding. The policeman is bleeding. But then he was bleeding terribly from his face, was bleeding very bad from the bullet he got. And he put a bandage on him. He had one bandage. So he put it on his face. And 3 hours later, he was rescued by one of the heroes of the police, one of the police heroes, who ran in under fire together with another Hatzalah volunteer, Yaakov Bar Yochai. And they together schlepped him out of there. Under fire, they had still fire going on for hours. And hundreds of terrorists were there. And they got him out. And Yaakov Bar Yochai put Chaim in his car. And then he put 3 other injured people in the car. And they were all laying one above each other, more or less, in a car, in a private car. And he just said he's going to drive through so quickly that even if they shoot, they're not going to be able to aim on them. And he put his foot down, and he went through driving 180 kilometers an hour. And Chaim, who was the one who was injured, but he was still everything was with him. He realized one of the injured people was bleeding from his back from a gunshot, a gun wound, and it was bleeding terribly. So he took off his own bandage that was full of blood already, and he put it in, he stuck it into the soldier's back, the soldier who's bleeding above him with a hole in his back, and just stopped his bleeding that way. All 4 injured people in that car were saved. So in my opinion, all these 4 are heroes. Chaim, who's a hero, Yaakov Bar Yochai, who drove them under fire, was a hero. And I'm telling you, every single volunteer I met since that day, I'm hugging every single one of them and telling them that they are the hero, every single one.
Yeah, so, wow, it's hard for me to ask a question after you tell these kinds of stories. When you and I spoke about, as we go into Hanukkah, the idea of the Maccabees and how the Maccabees were also, heroes in their way, in their time. And these are the heroes from October 7th, who are like on Hanukkah, shining a light, during these very, very difficult times. United Hatzalah and its volunteers are also a light for some, as you just described. United Hatzalah is the light for them. So tell me what you're doing now to help Israelis find hope and to cope with the situation today.
Well, it's amazing to see Israel. I was just thinking about it today. We're 2 months after, and I think the heroism that you see in this country and the unity you see in this country is things I just heard about. I heard about in the 1948. That's what I heard of. People are just looking for places to help, people to help, organizations to help, people looking for new initiatives, people walking the streets. You know, you used to fight over parking. Now, if you see someone need a parking, you say, no, take my parking. I'll find somewhere else. It's unbelievable to see what's happening to this country. And I really think the Maccabees are an example of what United Hatzalah are because they took responsibility to protect the Jewish people. And they were volunteers, the Maccabees. They said, if we don't protect the people, if we don't protect, we don't fight, there is no people anymore. We would not exist today as Jewish nation or at all if they didn't have the Maccabees. And I think United Hatzalah was an example of why a civilian, not governmental organization can make a difference. When you're not a government organization and you don't have regulations with unions are important, but all of a sudden you see you need disruptive organizations like United Hatzalah.
So I want to ask you one last question because we're going to run out of time here. But I know that one of the things, just a practical question that you're doing, is that you're working to provide some family safety courses, some new courses for families here in Israel. And simultaneously, you're working to be able to train some people abroad to be able to manage their safety and security better. In a minute or two, just tell me a little bit about that program and what you're doing with it.
Look, every second counts. And that's what United Hatzalah is about, 90 seconds. And it doesn't have to be waiting for a person with an orange vest. You could be with a small little act of heroism, you could be the hero. But you need to know how to do it. It's very simple. United Hatzalah took upon itself to save lives in 90 seconds. I think we could save lives in 9 seconds because the person next to that person who's calling for help, if you're calling for help, someone's bleeding, all you need to do is, yes, call for help, number one, for professional people. Number two, go over to the patient. I know you think you're not a paramedic or you're not an EMT, but you could be a lifesaver of that person. And today we see it more than ever. God forbid these things can happen anywhere around the world. Bad people are there training and practicing to kill us, to hurt people. We need to have some good people who are training and practicing to save people. And that's why we do this.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I so appreciate it.
Toda rabah. Thank you for the Jerusalem Post for this great initiative.
I now want to invite Yifat Sela, chairwoman of Emunah Israel, who will be interviewed by Tamar Uriel Berry, managing editor of jpost.com.
Yifat, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So tell me, Emunah saw on the ground how children in its care, whether it be in the child care facilities, whether it be in the children's homes, were directly impacted immediately during the October 7th massacre. Tell us a little bit about that reaction.
So first of all, it's a giant organization and it's spread all over the country. So we have like our 3,000 workers, employees, and we still have 10,000 children who come every day to any of our initiatives. So first of all, we had to, people were evacuated. So we started to, we have homeschools, which children actually live in. In those, we kept on working. They were working even during the October 7th. And those are kids who are all year are not in their original houses. So this is their home. So what we actually did is trying to get the real life routine, to get back into life, because if we do that, then we give the parents of the children they'll be able to get back to their life. And on the other side, we have 13 counseling centers which give therapies and give emotional support. So we asked them to support the children and the workers of Emunah, and of course we opened special hotlines which gave services to
audience of Israel, just got phone calls from every person who wanted to get escort and to get supported by those hotlines.
So I have to know now, we talk about the children, but in general, is Israel a traumatized nation now?
I think that, of course, yes. The answer is yes. But I think that Israel would be able to get out of this trauma, and I believe that we have the facilities, we have the strength of our people and the strength of our organizations in Israel, which will help us to get out of this trauma. So we have been through smaller traumas before. This is a huge, giant new trauma. But I think yes, we are. But we will cover it. We'll do it.
Wow. That's not easy at all. I can imagine that puts a lot of pressure on Emunah's many facilities.
Of course, and in Emunah we see every day 10,000 children, and it took us like a month to get everyone back to schools, daycare centers, and the homeschooling. And also our employees. We have 10% of our employees that live in the Gaza Strip, and also 10% of our daycare centers are in the south. So in order to get everyone back and have shelters in every place, and during the day sometimes we have sirens, and just to try to manage back and to let the parents of the children get back to their work in order to be able to just to manage life, the work-life balance, try to make, and each and every person in Israel just feels the stress. And I always say that, like, I'm a mother of 4, and I have also a son-in-law, and 4 of my children, they are now in the army.
Wow.
So try to manage, like, to have your own stress and the concern to everything that happens, and still just manage and try to get on and even to help other people. And I think that Emunah is an organization that helps other people. But by helping other people, you get more strength. This is what happens to us.
It's just creating a new type of routine for each and every person, right? So I'm curious, how do you see treatment? Because you're saying that you guys have facilities all over the country. How do you see treatment being handled or needing to be handled differently according to different areas, like the South versus the North versus Central Israel versus Jerusalem?
First of all, you mentioned, and I think I agree with you, that all over the country is the front line now. I mean, we all just have to fight on a daily basis. I'll tell you a story. I heard an 8 years old child from Petah Tikva. Petah Tikva is a city in the middle of the country which did not have like so many sirens. And I asked him, "How are you?" And he said, he asked his mother, "Mommy, do we have insurance for a house?" And she was like, "Boom, you're 8 years old. What are you asking about insurance?" And then he said, if a bomb comes on our house, you and Daddy will be able to fix the house. So you can see that even a child in the middle of the country is very concerned about it. By the way, this child asked his mother later on. He told her, not even asked her, that he checked the closets in the house and he found the one that is best to hide in. This is the one in the toilet. And he said, "I'm going to hide over there." So I think that in the short term, what we do have to do, and this is what we did in Emunah, is to give answers to every question that comes up, not to hide the questions. And what we did is open hotlines in order to make which are held by 100 therapists that we have in Emunah, which on daily basis, on routine, work in 13 municipalities. But now they work like all from Zoom, they work by phones, and they just give the first answers to people who call them. And meanwhile, like later on, we will open, the therapy is going to start. Therapy takes much longer, and it's better to have the therapy just next to your home, next to your community, and to be held over there. So now it's the hotlines, now it's to give the first aid therapy, and the long term is going to be, we now have to earn strength and facilities and whatever we need in order to be able to give it for a very long time. This child is only 8; he's going to probably need for many years.
Now, Emunah provides also a lot of support in other branches of societal care and welfare and education. One of them being, of course, in unique familial situations. And in extreme cases, obviously, domestic violence. How are these situations, how are these types of homes affected by the current war?
Well, we said by the COVID, it increased in 30%. So we're not in COVID now. It's different, and it's sometimes we don't know the real answer yet. We didn't measure it yet. What we hear is that it increases, and actually it comes into every house. So I think that speaking about we all suffered from violence against our nation, with violence against our country, and speaking of the violence in the houses, like. I think that we cannot speak about it right now in the meaning of percentage, but I think that we all know that when you all suffer, when we suffer from violence, it gets closer and closer to you. So I'm sure that we are going to hear from more and more situations that are being very complicated, and many of the families who had to be evacuated, like to different places, and to have stress comes to the house, and the financial situation in Israel now is very difficult. So people do not work. Some people were out of the work, so it's very comfortable. So I know, it's not comfortable. So I'm sure that we're going to have much more to give much more people access to. Help in this violence situation in the houses.
It's an unfortunate situation, but Emunah is doing an amazing job helping them. Ifatzela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our next panel is called Crisis Communications, Navigating the Networks Post-October 7th, and will feature two individuals who have become household names since October 7. Eylon Levy, Israeli government spokesman, and Tal Heinrich, spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. I will have the privilege of interviewing them alongside Avi Meir, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. We have with us here today two voices from the Israeli government who are helping to fill the role of telling Israel's side of the story to the world. It took Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu 10 months to hire an English spokesperson. October 7th seems to have pushed him over the edge. So here you are. Welcome, Eylon, and welcome, Tal.
It's good to be here, Mayan.
So I have to start by asking, how do you control yourselves when you are asked these preposterous questions by the foreign press? How do you hold it together?
I think for a long time, the international community has been urging us to exercise restraint during conflicts in Gaza. And that's a good lesson to apply in interviews with hostile media and not just conflicts with hostile terror organizations.
And Tal, do you have the same answer? What's your answer?
So Mark Regev, he taught me a trick because he's a veteran in this field. He told me, because in the very first interviews that I was doing, I spoke with my hands many times, and whenever I wanted to make a point, I made more movements with my hands, because you're always, you're shaking sometimes when you hear some of these questions. So he taught me to hold on to my chair and maybe squeeze even in something, and if I'm very, very angered, so I can control my posture and control my temper. But yeah, sometimes it's very challenging.
That's a good one. Mark didn't tell me that trick. I'm going to take that. I'm going to apply that now.
Because you don't speak like an Israeli.
So Tal, let me actually direct the next question to you. Are we doing a better job of presenting Israel's story this time than we have in previous rounds of fighting, in your opinion?
So as you're familiar with my background, Avi, but the audience is not, both Eylon and I were journalists for a long time and news anchors. And in past rounds of conflicts, I was on the other side working as a journalist and as a producer also in 2014 for CNN from Jerusalem. And I was actually observing Mark Regev from the side doing the job that Eylon and I are doing today. What I can say is that Israelis over the years have become very much aware and about what foreign media is doing and saying, and are very quick to put journalists or media outlets on the spot if something is totally off. So I think the Israeli public has changed a lot since then. Of course, social media plays a part in this, but generally speaking, I think I've been giving more interviews to the American media because I'm speaking to you from New York right now. I think the American media has been doing a good job, so to say, if I compare the coverage that we've seen in past rounds of conflict, relatively.
Eylon, what's your view?
I think we're putting up one hell of a fight. We're part of a team, me, Tal Heinrich in the US, Ambassador Mark Regev, Avi Hyman, who's also giving interviews, and together we're giving more than 24 interviews a day. Sometimes I'm giving more than 10 interviews, jumping between one TV interview, radio interview, podcast, because we are determined not to abandon any battlefield wherever there is a news outlet. If it's Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer on CNN to community radio in Ireland, if they want an Israeli government spokesman to be there, we will be there to tell Israel's story, because if we're not there, someone else will be. And that someone is not going to tell our story. And it's important. We cannot abandon anywhere on that public opinion battlefield, because it is absolutely critical to the success of this war and the success of our campaign to destroy Hamas.
So I have to, appeal to you. You're saying that in a very serious and strong way, but humor has
It's a serious situation.
It is a serious situation, but humor has certainly played into the way that you've been able to manage this very serious situation. And part of it is because it is as serious as it is and it's as tragic as it is. And so we have to sometimes laugh in order to get through it.
And that is the lesson of Jewish history. You have two choices. You either laugh or cry.
That's right. But, I want to ask you actually directly, what role for you does humor play in diffusing an intense interview? We've seen some recent memes, but also, in getting through the day when you're approached with so many interviews who, to be quite honest, are very hostile.
Personally, again, the lesson of Jewish history is when faced with a tragic situation, you can either laugh or cry, so try to laugh. Personally, humor is a coping mechanism. In a very dark situation, I find that humor offers that release valve. The problem is sometimes the humor is less appropriate and less successful, and you have to be very careful about reading the room and judging the situation. But certainly we're in a very, very dark period. My job outwardly is to explain Israel and explain Israel's story. And if along the way there is a way to provide a little bit of comic relief to raise national morale, which is so broken at the moment, then I'm happy for the jokes to come at my expense. Go for it.
Tal, do you feel that way as well? Are you able to laugh during any of this or use humor to help yourself get through the day?
I find Elon's, humor very, very, very useful during this war, because it's a combination of Jewish and British. So, he has double power in this.
The best of both.
So, in thinking through what we've seen over the past 7-8 weeks, how would you grade the foreign media's performance during this war?
I think it really depends on the outlet, and it depends on the journalists as well. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a false impression given to Israelis that the whole world media is against us and they're not talking about October 7th and they're all anti-Semites. Couldn't be further from the truth. They've been widely covering the atrocities of October 7th. Everyone understands that was a red line that cannot be crossed. And most journalists ask fair, if tough questions, and that's their job, and it helps us present our case. Unfortunately, sometimes we deal with journalists who are still interpreting the conflict through a very specific lens at which Israel is always at fault. Nothing it does is ever good enough. And any evidence of Israel's humanity, any evidence of its morality, has to fit within the story that explains that actually this is just for public consumption or they don't really mean it. And that's how we end up with the bizarre situation of that interview on Sky News, where this moment of pure humanity from Israel, that we're willing to release violent criminals in order to get our children back. That's how desperate we are to get our children back. Somehow becomes an insinuation that we don't value Palestinian lives, because maybe it's easier to continue telling that story that Israel is being callous and heartless than to accept that actually we're real people. We're suffering. We have an element of humanity as well. Israelis were victimized on October 7th. And the consequences of what are happening now are a consequence of that humanity coming under attack. And that is why we are fighting for humanity in this war.
Tal, what do you think? How would you grade the foreign media's performance during this war?
So I would make a distinction. As I said before, I think the American media overall gets it, simply gets it. In generalization again, but for me personally, the challenge came from European outlets, Western European outlets, in particular British media, something that Elon, for example, is much more familiar with. I've spent 5 hours in London my entire life. So it's, for me, again, it's very hard to understand this false moral equivalency that they're always trying to draw
it's a challenge. I mean, we're answering their questions, but sometimes it doesn't sink in. We keep repeating and repeating the very important things that we have to say, the facts that every Israeli knows to repeat in English at this point, but it just doesn't sink in because they always try to draw this false moral relativism, and it's a challenge again. And sometimes whenever you give interviews, going back to one of your earlier questions, you find yourself, it's a day full of interviews. Sometimes you have 6 or 10 of them, and you find yourself taking out so much energy for one interview, sometimes with one reporter, and this outlet is not the most watched, the most viewed or read one in Europe, but and they're dubbing you on top of that because it's a foreign language. And then by the end of the day, you don't have as much energies as for, when you go on Fox or CNN but every interview counts, every viewer counts, every opinion that you try to change for one moment, it counts.
But Tal, do you feel that Israel can even win this PR war? I mean, you said the world is not against us, Eilan, that's what you said. But I mean, is that the sentiment that you're getting beyond some of these American news outlets? Can we do this? Is another interview going to make the difference?
It's a very good question. I think we have to remind ourselves that and I said it yesterday in an interview on Fox News, that we are fighting the PR war, but we are not fighting for likes on social media. And we're not fighting for more hugs from, so to say, hugs from journalists or softer questions from anchors or more handshakes at the United Nations corridors. It's really a war for our survival. And this is the message that each one of us has to convey. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter. Like you have to know that your cause is the just cause. And let me quote Ron Dermer, I think in one of his very first interviews during this war, maybe day 2 or day 3, he said on air that the outpouring of support that we were receiving back on that day was right after the October 7th massacre should remain as we go forward, as we progress with the operation in Gaza, because it should remain when we're victorious just as much as when we are victims, because the cause of Israel is the just cause. And he said it preemptively, so early on in the war, because he saw what was coming. We all knew it. It's always this pattern that Israel gets a few days of grace after we're the victims. And there's another overlooked aspect over here. People think that October 7th happened and then Israel went to a war in Gaza. And nobody's talking about 11,000 missiles raining over Israeli communities. So again, the PR war is a challenge, but it's not the most important. It's important, but it's not the most important thing. We have to believe that the cause is the just cause.
Thank you.
Eilan, what would you view as a lesson that Israel can learn from the media campaign, but from this war in general? What do you take back for future efforts like this one?
Well, first of all, I hope we're never going to have future efforts like this one, because the purpose of this war is to end Hamas so it can never attack our people again. We hope that this is going to be the last Gaza war, because the purpose of the campaign is to totally dismantle the Hamas terror state. But we're constantly learning lessons on the move. We're learning the importance of getting real-time information out, accurate information out as quickly as possible. Logistical questions about facilitating the sheer number of journalists who came to Israel in the early days, want to bear witness to those atrocities and the aftermath in the kibbutzim. This isn't just a question of messaging, it's also a question of logistics to make sure that the foreign press are able to get the images they need. And we're constantly learning on the move, trying to tighten our messages. And I can say, some of the unsolicited advice I get over social media is perhaps not very helpful, but sometimes I get messages and I say, yes, you know what, that is exactly how we should say it. That is a good point. And I find myself incorporating it in the messages as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Eilan, for being with us today. And Tal, thank you very much.
We, the children in Israel, are going through very sad, scary, and difficult times. We wanted to ask you for only one thing. Stand
when the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So all I ask is stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand.
Stand by me, stand by me.
If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, all the mountains should crumble to the sea. Stand by.
No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long
as you stand
by me. So all I ask is stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. All I ask is stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me.
Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me.
Stand by me. Stand by me.
As we conclude this conference, it is evident that the fight against anti-Semitism is a timeless struggle, deeply rooted in history. Today, we've delved into the unsettling reality that recent tragic events, particularly the October 7th Hamas massacre and the Swords of Iron War, have heightened the sense of vigilance within the Jewish community and the State of Israel.
In facing this challenge, the imperative is clear: unity. We must unite in our effort to educate others about the perils of anti-Semitism and to illuminate the darkness when it rears its ugly head. The Jerusalem Post, as a gateway between Israel and the global community, remains committed to fostering understanding and dialogue. We trust that this conference has not only shed light on critical issues, but has also equipped each of you with tangible action items and ideas. It is through collective effort and awareness that we can stand against anti-Semitism and provide support to the only Jewish state and the Jewish people.
Thank you for your participation, commitment, and dedication to a world free from the shadows of prejudice. You'll be able to find today's program and individual clips over the coming days on our website, jpost.com, and on our Facebook page. I'm Avi Meir, Editor-in-Chief of Jerusalem Post, and this is Maayan Hoffman. Let's continue to pray together for the return of our hostages in Gaza and the well-being of the Israeli security forces and the people of Israel.